In November 1995, in front of an audience of more than 20 million people, the Princess of Wales sat in a quiet room at Kensington Palace and confessed, on national television, that she had loved a man who was not her husband. The interviewer asked her whether she had been unfaithful, whether the rumors about the cavalry officer were true, and Diana, the most famous and most photographed woman in the world, did not deny it or deflect it. She said simply that she had adored him, that she had been in love with him, the admission delivered with a directness that stunned the watching nation. The man she was speaking of was James Hewitt, a household cavalry officer who had come into her life in 1986 to teach her to ride, and had stayed to become the great secret love of her unhappy marriage. He was charming and handsome and attentive, everything her husband was not, and he gave the desperately lonely princess the affection and the passion she was starved of in a marriage that had become a kind of prison. For 5 years they conducted a secret affair, snatched hours of happiness in a life of misery, a real and genuine love that was, by every account, one of the few sources of joy in Diana's caged existence, and she was never allowed to keep it. She was the Princess of Wales, the wife of the future king, the mother of the heir to the throne, bound to the marriage and the monarchy by chains she could not break, forbidden any love of her own by the very institution that permitted her husband his. Charles had Camilla, openly enough that everyone knew. Diana could have James Hewitt only in secret, only at terrible risk, only as a hidden refuge that could never become anything more. The man she loved was a man she was never permitted to love, denied her by the cage of the institution and the cruelty of a marriage crowded by another woman. But this is not a simple love story, because the man Diana loved would in the end betray her in a way that turned a genuine romance into one of the most sordid scandals of the age. After the affair ended, James Hewitt sold their story, cooperated with a tell-all book about their most intimate moments, took a fortune for the secrets of a love that Diana had trusted him to keep. He became, in the eyes of Britain, the love rat, the cad, one of the most reviled men in the country, the officer who had won a princess's heart and then sold it for money. And around his name there grew a lie, a cruel and persistent falsehood, that he was the true father of Diana's younger son, a rumor that the simplest comparison of dates proves to be impossible and that has wronged the living to this day. This is the real story of James Hewitt, the forbidden love and the betrayal and the lie, and the woman at the center of it, who deserved far better than any of them gave her. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Before he was the most notorious lover in Britain, before his name became a byword for betrayal, James Hewitt was a soldier, the son of a soldier, raised in the disciplined and horsebound world of the British cavalry, a world that produced a particular kind of Englishman and that shaped the man Diana would one day fall in love with. James Lifford Hewitt was born on the 30th of April, 1958, in Derry, in Northern Ireland, where his father was stationed with the military at the time of his birth. The military was in his blood from the very beginning, because his father, John Hewitt, was not merely a serviceman but a figure of real distinction, an officer in the Royal Marines who had also been an Olympic athlete, a competitor in the modern pentathlon at the Olympic Games of 1952. To be the son of such a father was to be born into a world of physical achievement and military service, and the values that go with them, the discipline and the courage and the devotion to duty that the armed forces instilled, and James grew up in the shadow of a father who embodied those values at the highest level. The expectation of a military life, the assumption that a son would follow a father into the service, was part of the air he breathed from his earliest years. The family's life was the peripatetic life of a military family, moving with the father's postings, and James spent his childhood in the south of England, in Kent and in Devon, the green and settled counties of the English countryside. His mother, Shirley, came from a comfortable professional background, the daughter of a London dental surgeon who had settled in Devon, and the world James grew up in was the world of the comfortable English middle and upper middle class, a world of decent schools and country pursuits and the assumptions of a particular social stratum. It was in the Devon countryside, among the horses and the hunting and the outdoor life of rural England, that James developed the passion that would, by a strange turn of fate, eventually bring him into the orbit of the royal family, the passion for horses and riding that would make him, in time, the riding instructor to a princess. His education followed the conventional path of his class. He attended a preparatory school in Exeter and then went on to Millfield, a well-known public school in Somerset, one of the independent schools that educated the sons of the comfortable classes and prepared them for the universities and the professions and the armed services. Millfield was known particularly for its emphasis on sport, a fitting school for the son of an Olympic athlete, and James pursued the athletic and outdoor life that suited his temperament and his background. He was not, by the accounts that survive, a notably academic young man, not a scholar or an intellectual, but rather a physical and practical and sociable one, the kind of young man who thrived in the structured and active world of the public school, and who looked naturally toward a career in the military rather than the life of the mind. After Millfield, James followed the path that his background and his father's example had laid out for him, and he went to the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, the great training institution of the British Army, the place where the officers of the army were forged. Sandhurst was the gateway to a commission, the rigorous training ground where young men were turned into officers, schooled in the discipline and the leadership and the military skills that the army required, and James passed through it successfully, graduating and earning his commission in 1978 at the age of 20. The young man who emerged from Sandhurst was a trained officer of the British Army, ready to take his place in one of its regiments, embarking on the military career that his father's example and his own inclinations had pointed him toward. The regiment he joined was one of the grandest and most glamorous in the entire British Army, and the choice would prove fateful, because it placed him in exactly the kind of position from which a young officer might come into contact with the royal family. James was commissioned into the Life Guards, one of the two regiments of the Household Cavalry, the senior regiments of the British Army, the mounted troops who provided the sovereign's personal guard and who performed the great ceremonial duties of the monarchy. The Household Cavalry was a world apart, a world of horses and tradition and ceremonial splendor, of officers drawn largely from the aristocracy and the upper classes, of a glamour and a prestige that set it above the ordinary regiments of the line. To be a household cavalry officer was to belong to a select and glittering world, to wear one of the most magnificent uniforms in the army, to perform duties that brought one into the very presence of royalty, and James Hewitt, the soldier's son from Devon, had entered that world. The life of a cavalry officer suited James, and he found in the military the excitement and the fulfillment he had been looking for. He rose through the junior ranks in the normal course, promoted to lieutenant in 1980, and he served the postings that a young officer served, including a tour in Germany in the early 1980s, where the British Army maintained a substantial presence as part of the Cold War defense of Western Europe. He found the work fulfilling, by his own later account, thriving in the structured and active and purposeful world of the army, advancing in his career, becoming a capable and competent officer. He was in these years a young man living the life he had been raised for, a cavalry officer in a grand regiment, pursuing a military career, enjoying the glamour and the excitement and the camaraderie of the soldier's life. He had become, by the mid-1980s, an acting captain, an officer of growing experience and responsibility, second in command of a tank squadron, a man on a solid and respectable military path. The horses were central to his life, and they were the thing that would, by an extraordinary chance, change everything. James was an accomplished horseman, a skilled rider, and an expert in the equestrian world that was so much a part of the Household Cavalry's existence, and his ability with horses was one of his real and genuine accomplishments. In a regiment built around mounted ceremonial duties, in a world where riding was both a professional necessity and a social accomplishment, James's skill with horses marked him out and gave him a particular expertise. And it was this expertise, this genuine ability as a horseman and a riding instructor, that would provide the pretext and the occasion for his entry into the life of the Princess of Wales. Because when Diana needed help to overcome her fear of horses, it was a skilled riding instructor that she needed. And James Hewitt was exactly that. The personal qualities that James brought to his life, the qualities that would shape his relationship with Diana, were the qualities of a particular kind of charming and attractive young officer. He was handsome, conventionally and notably handsome, with the kind of looks and bearing that drew attention. He was charming, possessed of an easy and attentive manner that made people, and particularly women, feel the warmth of his attention. And he was, by the accounts of those who knew him, and by the later assessments of his character, something of a ladies' man, a man with a practiced charm and an attractiveness to women, the kind of man who knew how to make a woman feel cherished and admired, These qualities, the good looks and the charm and the attentiveness, were the qualities that would make him so appealing to a princess starved of affection, the qualities that would draw the lonely and unhappy Diana to him, and they were, in a sense, the foundation of the whole drama that was to come. He was a charming and handsome and attentive young officer, exactly the kind of man who could give a neglected woman the attention she craved. It is worth pausing, before the great drama of his life began, on the ordinariness of James Hewitt up to this point. The unremarkable nature of the life he had led before fate carried him into the orbit of the royal family. He was, in the mid-1980s, simply a young cavalry officer, one of many, a competent and charming and attractive military man, pursuing a respectable career in a grand regiment. There was nothing in his life to suggest that he was destined for fame or notoriety, nothing to mark him out as a figure who would one day be known across the world, reviled and discussed and mythologized. He was an ordinary officer leading an ordinary officer's life, distinguished only by his charm and his good looks and his skill with horses, a man whose existence gave no hint of the extraordinary turn it was about to take. And this ordinariness is part of the story, because it was chance, the sheer accident of being asked to teach a princess to ride, that lifted James Hewitt out of his ordinary life and into the great drama that would define and ultimately consume him. For the turn that was about to come was the kind of turn that no one could have predicted, the entry of an ordinary cavalry officer into the most extraordinary and most scrutinized marriage in the world. James Hewitt was about to be drawn into the orbit of the Princess of Wales, into the unhappy heart of the royal marriage, into a relationship that would change his life entirely and carry him from the obscurity of an ordinary military career into the glare of a fame he could never have imagined. The charming and handsome young officer, the skilled horseman, the soldier's son from Devon, was about to meet the most famous woman in the world, a woman trapped in a miserable marriage and starved of love, and the meeting would set in motion the drama of forbidden love and betrayal and myth that is the real story of James Hewitt. But to understand that drama, to understand how a princess came to fall in love with a cavalry officer, and why she was never allowed to keep him, we must first understand the world she inhabited, the unhappy and constrained and desperate world of the Princess of Wales in the mid-1980s, the cage of a marriage that had become a prison, and the loneliness that made her ready for the love that Hewitt would offer. Because Diana did not fall in love with James Hewitt out of nowhere, she fell in love with him because she was desperately unhappy, because her marriage had failed her, because she was starved of the affection and the attention that every human being needs, and that her husband would not give her. And the story of her love for Hewitt is, at its root, the story of her unhappiness and the cage she lived in. How Diana came to be so unhappy, what her marriage had become by the mid-1980s, and why the most envied woman in the world was in truth a desperately lonely one, ready for the love that a charming cavalry officer would offer, is where the story turns next. Because to understand the forbidden love, we must first understand the cage, the unhappy marriage and the constrained existence that made Diana ready to risk everything for the affection of James Hewitt. That cage, the unhappy world of the Princess of Wales, is where we go now. To understand why Diana fell in love with James Hewitt, you have to understand the cage she lived in, the gilded and glittering prison of a marriage that had failed her, and an institution that confined her, because her love for Hewitt grew out of a desperate unhappiness that the world, dazzled by her fame and her beauty, could not see. The most envied woman on earth was, in the private reality of her life, one of the loneliest, and the loneliness is the key to everything that followed. It had begun, as everyone remembers, with a fairy tale. In July 1981, Lady Diana Spencer married Charles, the Prince of Wales, the heir to the British throne, in a wedding of such spectacle and grandeur that it transfixed the entire world, watched by a global audience of hundreds of millions. A ceremony of carriages and crowds and a sweeping ivory gown, the very image of a storybook romance made real. Diana was 20 years old, young and beautiful, and apparently radiant, the shy English girl who had captured the heart of a prince and was to become, in time, the Queen of England. The world saw a fairy tale, the perfect royal romance, the beginning of a happy and glittering life, and the world believed in it, because it was exactly the story that everyone wanted to be true. The reality hidden behind the spectacle was very different, and the marriage was troubled almost from the start. The fairy tale was a fiction, and beneath it lay a union that was mismatched and strained and increasingly deeply unhappy. Diana and Charles were ill-suited to each other in ways that became apparent quickly, divided by age and temperament and interests. by the 13 years between them and by the profound differences in their natures and their tastes. Diana was young and emotional and in need of warmth and affection and reassurance. Charles was older and more reserved, set in his ways and his interests, formed by a very different world and a very different temperament. The gap between them, the mismatch of two people who had married without truly knowing or suiting each other, became a source of growing strain, the fairy tale curdling into the reality of an unhappy marriage between two people who could not give each other what they needed. But the deepest wound in the marriage, the thing that poisoned it beyond any hope of repair, was the presence of another woman, the woman who had been part of Charles's life before Diana, and who would remain part of it throughout the marriage. Charles had loved Camilla Parker Bowles, had been attached to her for years before his marriage to Diana, and that attachment did not end with the wedding. It persisted, a continuing presence in Charles's life and heart, a relationship that ran alongside his marriage, and that Diana came to know about and to feel with a terrible and corrosive certainty. The famous words that Diana would one day speak, the observation that there had been 3 people in the marriage, and that it was therefore rather crowded, captured the devastating truth of her situation, the reality of a wife who knew that her husband's heart belonged to another woman, that she was in a sense the intruder in her own marriage, the third party in a relationship that had never truly made room for her. The presence of Camilla was the wound that would not heal, the betrayal at the heart of the marriage, the thing that made Diana's unhappiness not merely the disappointment of a mismatch, but the agony of a woman who knew she was not loved. The timing of the deepest estrangement is significant for the story of Hewitt, because it was in the years after the birth of her second son that Diana's marriage reached its most desolate point. Diana had done her duty as the Princess of Wales, had borne 2 sons, William in 1982 and Harry in 1984, securing the succession and fulfilling the central expectation placed upon her. And it was around the time of Harry's birth, or perhaps even before it, that Charles is understood to have returned more fully to his relationship with Camilla, the marriage emptying out into a hollow arrangement as the husband's heart turned back to the woman he had always loved. By the mid-1980s, then, in the very years when James Hewitt would come into her life, Diana was a woman whose marriage had become a cold and loveless thing, a wife who had given her husband 2 sons and received in return the knowledge that his affection lay elsewhere, a princess living in the wreckage of a fairy tale that had never been real. The desolation of these years, the emptiness of the marriage at exactly the moment when Hewitt appeared, is the essential background to the affair, the unhappiness that made her ready for the love he would offer. The loneliness of Diana's situation was compounded by the nature of the institution she had married into, the cold and rigid and unforgiving world of the British monarchy, which offered her no comfort and no support in her unhappiness. The royal family was not a warm or an emotionally nurturing institution, not a place where a young and struggling woman might find sympathy and understanding and help. It was a formal and a duty-bound and an emotionally constrained world, governed by protocol and tradition and the stiff upper lip, a world that valued the suppression of feeling and the performance of duty above the messy realities of human emotion. Diana, an emotional and needy and struggling young woman, found herself trapped in this cold institution, isolated and unsupported, expected to perform her royal duties and maintain the royal image regardless of the private agony of her failing marriage. The institution gave her no help, offered her no warmth, provided no refuge from her unhappiness, and its coldness deepened her isolation, leaving her alone with her misery in the midst of the most public and scrutinized life imaginable. The isolation was, in its way, the cruelest aspect of Diana's situation, the terrible solitude of a woman surrounded by people and attention and yet profoundly alone. She was the most famous woman in the world, photographed and followed and adored by millions, never out of the public eye, surrounded always by the apparatus of royal life, the staff and the courtiers, and the endless public engagements. And yet within all this, at the center of all this attention, she was desperately alone, isolated in her unhappiness, lacking the one thing that all the fame and attention could not provide, which was the love and the intimacy and the genuine human connection that she craved. Her marriage gave her no love, the institution gave her no warmth, the public adoration, real as it was, could not reach the private loneliness at the core of her life. She was a woman starved of affection in the midst of plenty, alone in the midst of crowds, unloved in the midst of adoration, and the contrast between her glittering public life and her desolate private reality was the particular torment of her existence. The toll of all this on Diana was severe, and it expressed itself in the genuine suffering that she would later speak about, with a frankness that shocked the world. The unhappiness of her marriage and the isolation of her life took a real and serious toll on her well-being, manifesting in the struggles with her health and her emotional state that she would in time acknowledge openly. She suffered in these years a depth of distress that went beyond ordinary unhappiness, the genuine anguish of a woman whose life had become unbearable to her, whose marriage had failed her, and whose situation offered no escape. It is important to treat this suffering with the seriousness and the dignity it deserves, to recognize that behind the glittering public image was a woman in real distress, struggling with the consequences of a loveless marriage and an isolating life, enduring a private agony that the world could not see. Her suffering was real, and it was serious, and it was the product of a genuinely cruel situation, the entrapment of a young woman in a marriage and an institution that gave her no love and no comfort and no way out. It was into this desolation, this cage of unhappiness and isolation and loveless marriage, that James Hewitt would come, and it is against this background that his appeal must be understood. To a woman in Diana's situation, starved of affection and desperate for warmth, a charming and handsome and attentive man who offered her kindness and admiration, and the simple pleasure of being valued, would be a figure of overwhelming appeal. Hewitt offered exactly what Diana lacked and craved: the attention and the affection and the passion that her marriage had denied her, the experience of being cherished and desired that she had been starved of for years. He was warm where Charles was cold, attentive where Charles was indifferent, present where Charles was absent, and to a woman drowning in loneliness, the warmth and attention he offered would be like air to someone suffocating. The affair that would develop between them was not at its root a frivolous indulgence or a careless betrayal. It was the response of a desperately unhappy woman to the first real warmth she had encountered in years, the reaching of a drowning person toward a source of rescue, the turning of a starved heart toward the affection it had been denied. This is the context that makes Diana's love for Hewitt not merely understandable but in a sense inevitable, the predictable response of a human being in an impossible situation. A young woman trapped in a loveless marriage, knowing her husband's heart belonged to another, isolated in a cold institution, starved of affection and desperate for warmth, encountering a charming and attentive man who offered her the love she craved. The outcome was almost foreordained, the falling in love almost certain, because Diana was a human being with human needs, and those needs had been so thoroughly denied by her marriage and her situation, that the appearance of someone willing to meet them could hardly fail to draw her. She fell in love with James Hewitt because she was starved of love, because her marriage had failed her, because she was desperately lonely and he offered her warmth. And to understand this is to understand that her love for him was not a betrayal of a happy marriage, but the response of a woman to the failure of an unhappy one, the seeking of the affection that her own husband would not give her. There is a deep poignancy in Diana's situation as the mid-1980s unfolded, the poignancy of a young woman who had everything the world could envy and nothing that the heart requires, whose fairy tale life was in truth a desolation, whose glittering existence concealed a profound and genuine misery. She was beautiful and famous and adored, the Princess of Wales, the future queen, the most photographed woman on earth, and she was miserable, lonely, unloved, trapped in a failed marriage and a cold institution, starved of the affection that every human being needs. The gap between what she appeared to have and what she actually had, between the envy of the world and the reality of her life, was the particular tragedy of Diana, and it was this tragedy, this desolation behind the glittering facade, that made her ready for the love that James Hewitt would offer, ready to risk everything for the warmth and affection she had been so long denied. And so the stage was set for the meeting that would change both their lives, the encounter between the desperately unhappy princess and the charming cavalry officer, the meeting that would grow into the great forbidden love of Diana's life. The cage had been built, the unhappiness established, the loneliness and the longing and the desperate need for affection all in place, and into this situation James Hewitt was about to step, offering the warmth and the attention that Diana craved, beginning the affair that would become her refuge and in the end the source of one of the great scandals of the age. The meeting was about to happen, the forbidden love about to begin, and it would begin fittingly with the very thing that had brought Hewitt his particular expertise, with horses and riding lessons and the offer of a charming officer to help a frightened princess overcome her fear. How Diana and James Hewitt met, how the riding lessons became a friendship and the friendship became a love, and how the desperately unhappy princess found in the charming cavalry officer the warmth and affection she had been so long denied, is where the story turns next. Because the cage has been described, and the loneliness established, and now the moment has come for the entrance of the man who would offer Diana the love she craved, the beginning of the forbidden romance that is the heart of this story. That meeting, the beginning of the forbidden love, is where we go now. The meeting that would change both their lives, and that would become one of the most consequential encounters in the modern history of the royal family, happened by chance, at a party, in the summer of 1986, and it very nearly did not happen at all. The thread by which the whole drama hung was a slender one, and the recognition of how easily it might never have occurred adds a particular poignancy to the story of what followed. James Hewitt almost did not attend the party where he met Diana. The gathering, a social occasion in the summer of 1986, clashed with a prior engagement, a dinner he was already committed to, and by the ordinary courtesies of social life he might well have kept his existing commitment and stayed away. Had he done so, had he behaved as a punctilious man might, and honored his earlier engagement, the meeting would never have taken place, and one of the most notorious affairs in royal history would never have begun. The whole drama of the forbidden love and the betrayal and the scandal hung on the small accident of which engagement Hewitt chose to keep, the slender thread of a social decision that could so easily have gone the other way, that he went to the party rather than the dinner, that this small choice set in motion everything that followed, is the kind of chance on which the great dramas of life so often turn. The accident that changes everything. The party was hosted by a woman close to Diana, one of her ladies-in-waiting, Hazel West, and it was the kind of private social gathering at which the Princess of Wales might relax somewhat from the relentless formality of her public life. Diana was present, the unhappy princess in the midst of her desolate marriage, and James Hewitt was present, the charming cavalry officer, and at this party the two of them met and fell into conversation. The meeting was informal, a social encounter at a private party, the kind of ordinary occasion that might pass without significance, and yet from this ordinary meeting would grow the extraordinary drama of their affair. They were introduced, they began to talk, and something in the conversation struck a chord, some immediate ease and connection that drew them to each other from the very first. The quality of that first conversation, as Diana later described it, was its naturalness, the easy and immediate rapport that sprang up between them, and it was this naturalness that first attracted her to him. By the account she would give to her protection officer, the conversation felt entirely natural, the two of them getting along from the start with a comfort and an ease that was for Diana a striking and welcome experience. To a woman who lived in a world of formality and strain, whose marriage was cold and whose royal life was rigid and whose every public moment was scrutinized, the simple pleasure of an easy and natural conversation with a charming man would have been a rare and precious thing. Hewitt was easy to talk to, warm and engaging and attentive, and Diana found in their first conversation a comfort and a connection that she sorely lacked in her life. The simple human pleasure of getting along with someone, of being listened to and engaged with and made to feel interesting and valued. It was this, the natural ease of their connection, that first drew her to him, the experience of a warmth and a rapport that her cold marriage had denied her, the pretext that would allow the connection to develop, that would give them a reason to meet again and to spend time together, emerged from the conversation itself, and it was the very thing that constituted Hewitt's particular expertise. In the course of their talk, the subject of horses arose, and Diana confided in him something that was true and that gave him his opening, the fact that she was afraid of horses, that she had a long-standing fear of riding that troubled her. For Hewitt, the accomplished horseman and skilled rider, this was a natural opening, and he offered to help, suggesting that he could give her riding lessons, that he could help her overcome her fear and learn to ride with confidence. The offer was a natural and an innocent one on its face, the offer of a skilled horseman to help a nervous rider, and it gave them a legitimate reason to meet again, a pretext for spending time together that was entirely respectable and explicable. Diana accepted, and so began the riding lessons that would become the cover and the occasion for the developing relationship, the innocent pretext beneath which the affair would grow. There is something fitting, and something poignant, in the fact that the affair began with Diana's fear and Hewitt's offer to help her overcome it, because the dynamic of the riding lessons captured something essential about what the relationship would provide. Diana came to Hewitt as a frightened pupil seeking to overcome a fear, and Hewitt came to her as a confident and capable instructor, offering reassurance and support. And this dynamic of the nervous woman and the steadying man, the frightened pupil and the patient teacher, mirrored the deeper dynamic of what the relationship would become. Hewitt offered Diana not merely instruction in riding but a kind of reassurance and support that she lacked in her life, the steadying presence of a confident and capable man who helped her overcome her fears and grow in confidence. The riding lessons were a metaphor, in a sense, for the whole relationship, the provision of the support and the encouragement and the steadying affection that Diana craved. And it was in the course of these lessons, in the time they spent together over the horses, that the friendship deepened and the connection grew. The relationship developed gradually, growing from the riding lessons into a genuine friendship and then, in time, into something more. They spent time together over the horses, the lessons giving them regular occasion to meet, and in that time a real bond developed between them, a friendship founded on the ease and the rapport that had marked their first conversation. By Hewitt's own later account, it was a friendship that grew and grew, two people who got on very well and enjoyed each other's company, the connection deepening naturally over time as they spent more time together and came to know each other better. In the early days, Hewitt would later claim he thought his heart was safe, that the friendship would remain a friendship, that he was in no danger of becoming too deeply involved. But the friendship did not remain a friendship. It deepened, as such friendships between a lonely woman and an attentive man so often do, into attraction and then into love, the bond growing beyond the platonic into the romantic, until the two of them had fallen in love. The transformation from friendship to love was, in Hewitt's later telling, captured in a simple and revealing phrase, the acknowledgement that the one thing that went wrong was that they fell in love. The words, written years afterward, conveyed the sense that the love had not been planned or intended, that it had grown of its own accord from the friendship, that it had overtaken them despite themselves, the natural and perhaps inevitable result of the closeness and the rapport between a starved and lonely woman and a warm and attentive man. They fell in love, the friendship becoming a romance, the connection becoming a passion, and from that point the relationship became an affair, a secret romantic relationship between the Princess of Wales and the cavalry officer who had come to teach her to ride. The forbidden love had begun, growing from the innocent pretext of the riding lessons into the genuine and passionate and dangerous reality of an affair. What Hewitt offered Diana, and what made the affair so meaningful to her, was the affection and the attention and the passion that her marriage had so thoroughly denied her, and it is essential to understand the depth of what this meant to a woman in her situation. Diana had been starved of love, neglected by a husband whose heart belonged to another, isolated and lonely and desperate for warmth, and Hewitt gave her exactly what she had been denied. He gave her attention, making her feel valued and listened to and interesting. He gave her affection, the warmth and the tenderness that her cold marriage lacked. He gave her passion, the experience of being desired and cherished that she had been so long without. To a woman in Diana's desolation, these gifts were overwhelming, the sudden experience of being loved and wanted after years of neglect, and they bound her to Hewitt with a powerful intensity. He was, for Diana, the answer to her loneliness, the source of the affection she craved, the man who made her feel, after years of feeling unloved, that she was loved and desired and cherished. And this, the meeting of her desperate need for affection, is what made the affair so meaningful to her, so much more than a casual indulgence, a genuine refuge from the misery of her life. The intensity of the relationship in its early phase, the passion and the absorption of two people newly in love, was by Hewitt's later account overwhelming, the kind of all-consuming romantic intensity that lovers in the first flush of passion experience. He would later describe the feeling that they could not get enough of each other, that they wanted to see each other as much as they possibly could, the hunger and the absorption of new love. For Diana, this intensity, this experience of a passionate and absorbing love, was a transformation, the replacement of the cold emptiness of her marriage with the warmth and excitement of a genuine romance. She had gone from a loveless marriage to a passionate affair, from neglect to adoration, from emptiness to a relationship that consumed and excited and fulfilled her, and the contrast must have been intoxicating, the sudden flood of love and passion after years of desolation. The affair in its early phase gave Diana a happiness and an excitement, and a sense of being loved that she had not known in years, and it became for her the great refuge of her unhappy life, the source of joy in the midst of misery. It must be held in mind, even as we recognize the genuine love and the real refuge that the affair provided, that it was also, from the beginning, a dangerous and an impossible thing. a secret that could never be revealed, and a relationship that could never be acknowledged. Diana was the Princess of Wales, the wife of the heir to the throne, and an affair with a cavalry officer was a thing of enormous danger and impossibility, a secret that had to be guarded at all costs, a relationship that could never become open or permanent or legitimate. Even in the joy of the early phase, even in the flood of love and passion, the affair was shadowed by its impossibility, conducted in secret, hidden from the world, a refuge that could exist only in the shadows, and that carried always the risk of exposure and catastrophe. The forbidden love was real, and it was a genuine refuge, but it was forbidden, and the forbidding shaped everything about it, confining it to secrecy, denying it any future, making it a hidden thing that could never see the light. How the secret affair was conducted, how Diana and Hewitt found their moments of happiness in the shadows of her royal life, and what the relationship provided to the desperately unhappy princess in the years of their love, is where the story turns next. Because the forbidden love had begun, growing from the riding lessons into a passionate affair, and now the time has come to look at the secret love itself, the hidden refuge that Diana found in the arms of the cavalry officer, and the impossible nature of a relationship that could never be allowed to be. That secret love, the hidden refuge, is where we go now. For 5 years, from 1986 to 1991, Diana and James Hewitt conducted their secret love, a relationship hidden from the world and guarded with the greatest care. And in those 5 years the affair became the great refuge of Diana's unhappy life, the hidden place where she could find the warmth and the affection and the happiness that her marriage and her royal existence so cruelly denied her. The secret love was the central reality of those years for Diana, the source of joy in the midst of her misery, and to understand it is to understand both the genuine happiness it gave her and the impossible constraints that confined it. The affair was conducted in secret, hidden from the public and from the press and from the watching world, because it had to be, because the exposure of a love affair between the Princess of Wales and a cavalry officer would have been a catastrophe of the first order. The secrecy was absolute and it was essential, the relationship confined to private and hidden moments, snatched away from the relentless scrutiny of Diana's public life, conducted in the shadows where the cameras and the reporters could not reach. They met in private, in places where they could be together without observation, finding the hidden moments and the secret occasions in which their love could exist. And remarkably, the secret held for years, the affair remaining hidden from the public through the whole of its duration and beyond, a testament to the care with which it was guarded, and to the loyalty of the few who knew of it, and kept the secret. One of the strange and revealing aspects of the affair was where some of its moments unfolded, because the secret love was conducted in part at the very heart of Diana's married life, at the home she shared with the husband whose neglect had driven her to it. The relationship is understood to have included time at Highgrove, the Prince of Wales's country home in Gloucestershire, the marital home that Diana shared with Charles. The irony of the situation almost unbearable in its poignancy. The princess found her refuge from her loveless marriage, in part within the very walls of that marriage, the secret love conducted in the shadows of the marital home, a measure both of the boldness of the affair and of the emptiness of the marriage that allowed it. There is something almost heartbreaking in the image of Diana finding her stolen moments of happiness within the home she shared with the husband who did not love her, the secret refuge unfolding in the very place that symbolized her unhappy marriage, the love she was denied pursued in the shadows of the love that had failed her. The affair was known to a small circle of those around Diana, and in particular to the protection officers whose job it was to guard her, and the role of these men in the story is a revealing one. Diana's royal protection officers, the police bodyguards who accompanied her and ensured her safety, came to know of the affair because it was impossible to guard her closely without becoming aware of so central a part of her private life. Her chief protection officer, Ken Waff, who would later write about his years with Diana, was party to the secret, aware of the relationship with Hewitt and bound by the nature of his role to ensure both her safety and the secrecy of the affair. The protection officers did not see it as their place to moralize about the relationship, to judge the princess for seeking the affection her marriage denied her. Their job, as they understood it, was simply to keep her safe, and keeping her safe meant, in this case, helping to keep the affair secret, ensuring that the relationship that was so important to her could be conducted without the catastrophe of exposure. The role of these men, the discreet guardians who knew the secret and kept it, is part of the texture of the affair, the small circle of loyalty that allowed the forbidden love to exist. What the affair provided to Diana, the thing that made it the great refuge of her life, was the experience of being loved and cherished and valued that her marriage had so thoroughly denied her. And the contrast between the warmth of the affair and the coldness of the marriage was the heart of its meaning. In her marriage, Diana was neglected and unloved, her husband's heart belonging to another, her emotional needs unmet, her life cold and empty and lonely. In the affair she found the opposite, the warmth and the attention and the affection she craved, the experience of being desired and cherished and made to feel that she mattered. Hewitt gave her what Charles would not, the love and the passion and the tenderness that every human being needs, and to Diana, starved of these things for years, the affair was a flood of warmth into a life of cold, the meeting at last of needs that had been so long denied. The affair was her refuge precisely because it gave her what her marriage lacked, the love and the affection that made her feel, after years of feeling unloved, that she was cherished and desired. The intimacy of the relationship extended to the small and domestic pleasures of ordinary life, the simple shared moments that for Diana were perhaps the most precious of all. By Hewitt's own later recollection, their time together included the homely intimacies of a normal relationship, the small domestic moments that ordinary couples take for granted, but that Diana in her extraordinary and constrained life so rarely experienced. He recalled in a later interview the simple domestic division of their time together, the small shared tasks of cooking and washing up, the homely intimacy of a couple sharing the ordinary business of life. For a woman whose life was a whirl of public engagements and royal formality, whose existence was anything but ordinary, these small domestic moments would have held a particular sweetness, the simple pleasure of normality, of being not the Princess of Wales but simply a woman sharing ordinary intimate moments with a man who loved her. The domesticity of the affair, the homely shared moments, was part of what made it so precious to Diana, the experience of an ordinary intimacy that her extraordinary life otherwise denied her. It is important, in describing the genuine happiness and refuge that the affair provided, to be honest about the reality of what it was, neither inflating it into a perfect romance, nor diminishing it into a mere indulgence. The affair was a real love, a genuine relationship that provided Diana with real happiness and real comfort, the warmth and affection she desperately needed, and it was, in the context of her miserable marriage and her lonely life, a profound and meaningful refuge. But it was also a secret and a constrained and an impossible thing, a relationship that could exist only in the shadows, that could never be acknowledged or made permanent, that was shadowed always by its own impossibility and by the danger of exposure. The happiness it provided was real, but it was bounded, the joy of stolen moments rather than the security of an open and permanent love, the refuge of a hidden affair rather than the fulfillment of a relationship that could be lived in the light. Diana found in the affair a genuine happiness, but it was the happiness of the forbidden and the hidden, precious and real but confined and impossible, the refuge of a woman who could find love only in secret and could never keep it. The poignancy of the affair, in this light, is the poignancy of a happiness that could never be more than stolen, a love that could never escape the shadows, a refuge that could never become a home. Diana had found, in Hewitt, the love and the affection she craved, the warmth that her marriage denied her, the genuine happiness that her life otherwise lacked, and she could never have it openly, never make it permanent, never escape with it into a life that could be lived in the light. The affair was a refuge, but it was a refuge that could exist only in secret, a happiness that had to be hidden, a love that was forbidden, and that could never be allowed to become anything more than a hidden thing. There is a deep sadness in this, the sadness of a woman who found love only to discover that she could never keep it, who tasted happiness only in stolen and secret moments, who had in the affair the thing she most needed and could never have it in the open, never build a life on it, never escape the cage of her royal existence into the love that might have saved her. For the cage was always there, even in the happiness of the affair, the constraints of Diana's royal position confining the relationship and denying it any future. Diana was the Princess of Wales, bound to the monarchy and the marriage by chains she could not break, and the affair with Hewitt, however much it gave her, could never be more than a secret refuge within that cage. She could not leave Charles for Hewitt, could not make the affair public, could not build an open and permanent life with the man she loved. The institution and her position forbade it, confined her love to the shadows. denied her the possibility of the happiness she had found, and this confinement, this impossibility, was the tragedy at the heart of the affair, the reason it could never be more than a hidden refuge, the reason Diana was, in the words of the title, never allowed to love the man she loved. And this brings us to the deepest question of the whole story, the question of why Diana was never allowed to love James Hewitt, the question of the cage that confined her, and the hypocrisy that denied her the love that her own husband freely took. For the affair was forbidden, confined to secrecy, denied any future, and the forbidding was the work of the institution and the position that trapped Diana, the same institution that permitted Charles his own love for Camilla. The double standard at the heart of Diana's situation, the hypocrisy that let the husband have his mistress while denying the wife her lover, is the key to understanding why Diana was never allowed to love, and it is to that double standard, that cage of institutional hypocrisy, that we must now turn. How the institution confined Diana's love, why she was forbidden the happiness that her husband freely took, and what the hypocrisy of her situation reveals about the cruelty of the cage she lived in, is where the story turns next. Because Diana was never allowed to love James Hewitt, and the reasons for that prohibition, the constraints and the hypocrisy that denied her the love she had found, are the heart of the tragedy of her situation. That cage of hypocrisy, the reasons she was never allowed to love, is where we go now. The title of this story contains a quiet accusation, the claim that James Hewitt was the man Diana was never allowed to love, and the word that matters most in that phrase is the word allowed, because it points to the heart of the tragedy, to the fact that Diana's love was not free, that it was forbidden and confined and denied by forces larger than herself. She did love James Hewitt, genuinely and deeply, and she was never allowed to love him, never permitted to have openly the affection she had found, and the reasons for that prohibition reveal the cruelty of the cage she lived in, and the hypocrisy of the institution that confined her. To understand why Diana was never allowed to love, you have to understand what she was, the position she occupied, the role that defined and constrained her entire existence. Diana was the Princess of Wales, the wife of the heir to the throne, and the mother of the future king, and these facts placed her at the very centre of the British monarchy, bound her to the institution with chains that could not be broken. She was not a private woman free to live her own life and love as she chose. She was a public institution in her own right, a central figure of the monarchy, a woman whose every action carried implications for the crown and the succession and the future of the royal house. Her marriage was not merely a personal relationship, but a dynastic arrangement, a union on which the future of the monarchy depended, and her role as the mother of the heir bound her to that marriage with a force that went far beyond the ordinary bonds of matrimony. She belonged in a sense to the institution, her life subordinated to its needs, her freedom constrained by her position, and this subordination was the cage that confined her and that denied her the freedom to love as she chose. The constraints of her position made any love outside her marriage not merely a personal indiscretion but a matter of enormous danger and impossibility, a thing that threatened the institution itself. For the Princess of Wales to conduct an affair was to risk a scandal that could damage the monarchy, to threaten the dignity and the stability of the institution, to endanger the carefully maintained image on which the crown depended. The affair with Hewitt, had it been discovered and made public, would have been a catastrophe, a scandal of the first order that would have rocked the monarchy and damaged Diana's position and threatened the whole edifice of the royal marriage and the succession. And so the affair had to be hidden, confined to secrecy, denied any possibility of becoming open or permanent, because the institution could not tolerate it, because Diana's position forbade it, because the love she had found threatened the very structure of the monarchy to which she was bound. She was never allowed to love Hewitt openly because the institution could not allow it, because her position as the Princess of Wales made an open love an impossibility, a threat that could not be permitted. But here we come to the bitter heart of the matter, the hypocrisy that makes Diana's situation not merely sad but unjust, the double standard that denied to the wife what it permitted to the husband. For Diana was forbidden her love, while Charles was permitted his, the institution confining the princess to a loveless marriage while tolerating the prince's own relationship with another woman. Charles loved Camilla, had loved her before the marriage and continued to love her throughout it, and his relationship with her was, if not openly acknowledged, widely known and effectively tolerated, a continuing presence in his life that the institution accommodated. The husband had his love, his Camilla, his relationship outside the marriage, and the institution made room for it, allowed it to continue, tolerated the reality of a prince whose heart belonged to a woman who was not his wife. And the wife, Diana, was denied the same, forbidden the love she had found, confined to secrecy and impossibility, denied the openness and the toleration that her husband's love enjoyed. The double standard was stark and it was cruel. The institution permitting the husband his mistress while denying the wife her lover, tolerating Charles's love for Camilla while forbidding Diana's love for Hewitt. The hypocrisy of this double standard reflected, in part, the older and deeper inequities of the institution and the society it embodied. The long tradition by which the infidelities of husbands were tolerated, while those of wives were condemned. There was, in the history of royal and aristocratic marriage, a well-established double standard, a tradition by which a husband, and particularly a royal husband, might have his mistresses and his affairs with relative impunity, while a wife was held to a standard of fidelity whose violation was a grave and unforgivable offense. This double standard was rooted in the realities of succession and legitimacy, in the fact that a wife's infidelity raised questions about the paternity of heirs in a way that a husband's did not, but it was also rooted in the broader inequities of a patriarchal order that granted to men freedoms it denied to women. Diana, as the wife, was held to the standard of fidelity, her love condemned and forbidden, while Charles, as the husband, enjoyed the traditional latitude, his love tolerated and accommodated. The double standard that confined Diana was the ancient double standard of royal and aristocratic marriage, the inequity by which husbands were permitted what wives were denied, and it fell upon Diana with particular cruelty, denying her the love she had found while her husband enjoyed his own. The cruelty of Diana's situation is sharpened when you consider the order of events, the fact that it was Charles's own infidelity, his own love for Camilla, that had driven Diana to seek the affection she found with Hewitt. Diana did not betray a happy and faithful marriage. She sought love outside a marriage that her husband had already betrayed, turned to Hewitt for the affection that Charles, whose heart belonged to Camilla, would not give her. Her affair was a response to her husband's, her seeking of love a consequence of his own infidelity, her turning to Hewitt the result of being denied love by a husband who loved another. And yet she was the one condemned, the one forbidden, the one whose love was treated as the offense, while Charles, whose prior infidelity had driven her to it, enjoyed the toleration of the institution. The injustice is glaring. The wife condemned for seeking the love that her husband's infidelity had denied her, the victim of the betrayal treated as the offender, the woman driven to love outside her marriage by her husband's own faithlessness, held to a standard that her husband was permitted to violate. This is the cage of hypocrisy that confined Diana, the unjust double standard that denied her the love she had found while permitting her husband his own, and it is the heart of the tragedy of her situation, the reason she was never allowed to love. She had been trapped in a loveless marriage by a husband whose heart belonged to another. She had sought in her desperation the affection that her marriage denied her, finding in Hewitt the love and the warmth she craved, and she was forbidden to have it, confined to secrecy and impossibility, denied the openness and the toleration that her husband's own love enjoyed, held to a standard of fidelity that her husband was permitted to violate. The institution that should have protected her had instead trapped her, the marriage that should have given her love had instead denied it, and the love she had found in spite of everything was forbidden her by the same institution that tolerated her husband's infidelity. She was never allowed to love, and the prohibition was unjust, the product of a cage and a double standard that denied to the wife what it granted to the husband. There is a further dimension to the constraints that confined Diana, beyond the institutional prohibition and the double standard, and it is the sheer impossibility of the relationship ever becoming anything more than a secret affair, the absence of any future for the love she had found. Even setting aside the question of scandal and discovery, the relationship between Diana and Hewitt could never have become a permanent or an open thing, because Diana's position made it impossible. She could not divorce Charles and marry Hewitt, could not leave the monarchy for the cavalry officer, could not build an open and legitimate life with the man she loved. The mother of the future king could not run away with a riding instructor, could not abandon her royal position for a private love, could not escape the cage of her existence into a new life with Hewitt. The relationship was, by its very nature, confined to the present and the secret, denied any future, incapable of becoming the permanent and open love that might have given Diana the happiness she craved. It was a refuge, but a refuge with no exit, a love with no future, a happiness that could never escape the shadows into a life that could be lived in the open. The tragedy of Diana's situation then was the tragedy of a woman who had found love and could never keep it, who had discovered the affection she craved only to find that the institution and her position forbade her from having it openly or permanently. She was trapped in a cage, bound to a loveless marriage and a constraining institution, and the love she had found in spite of everything was confined to the shadows, denied any future, forbidden by the same institution that tolerated her husband's own love. She was never allowed to love, and the prohibition denied her the one thing that might have given her happiness, the open and permanent love that her heart craved. The cage held her, the double standard condemned her, the impossibility of the relationship denied it any future, and Diana, the most envied woman in the world, was left with a love she could not keep, a refuge she could not make permanent, a happiness confined forever to the shadows of her constrained existence. It is this, the cage and the hypocrisy and the impossibility, that gives the title its truth and its sting, the recognition that Diana genuinely loved James Hewitt and was genuinely never allowed to love him, denied the affection she had found by an institution that permitted her husband his own. The forbidden love was real, and the forbidding was unjust, the product of a cage that confined the wife while freeing the husband, a double standard that condemned Diana for seeking the love that her husband's infidelity had denied her, and the tragedy of it, the cruelty of a woman denied the love she had found, is the heart of the story, the injustice at the center of Diana's situation, the reason her love for Hewitt was a love she was never allowed to have. But the affair, real and meaningful as it was, did not last, and the love that Diana found in the shadows would in time come under strain and reach its end, undone by the pressures of the secret and the demands of Hewitt's career and the slow waning of a relationship that could never escape the shadows. How the affair came under strain, how the pressures of secrecy and the demands of duty wore at the relationship, and how the great forbidden love of Diana's life reached its end, is where the story turns next. Because the secret love that had been Diana's refuge would not endure forever, and the strain and the ending of the affair are the next chapter in the story of the man she was never allowed to love. That strain and ending, the waning of the forbidden love, is where we go now. The forbidden love that had been Diana's refuge did not endure forever, and the strain that brought it to its end came from many directions at once, from the demands of Hewitt's military career, from the relentless pressure of the secrecy that confined the relationship, and from the slow erosion that wears at any love that can never escape the shadows. The ending of the affair was not a sudden rupture but a gradual waning, a slow fading of the relationship under pressures that proved too great, and it left both Diana and Hewitt changed by the love they had shared and lost. The most concrete pressure on the relationship, and the one most often identified with its decline, came from the demands of Hewitt's career as a soldier, and in particular from his deployment to war. In 1990 and 1991, the Gulf War unfolded, the conflict that followed Iraq's invasion of Kuwait and that drew Britain and its allies into a major military campaign in the Middle East. Hewitt, as a serving officer in the British Army, was deployed to the Gulf, sent to Saudi Arabia as part of the British military presence in the campaign against Iraq, his duties as a soldier carrying him away from Britain and from Diana to the theatre of war. The deployment separated the lovers, placing Hewitt far away in a war zone, removing him from Diana's life for the duration of his service, and this separation placed a severe strain on the relationship, the distance and the absence and the demands of war pulling Hewitt away from the woman he loved. The separation of the war was the occasion for one of the most poignant and, in light of what was to come, most fateful aspects of the affair, the letters that Diana wrote to Hewitt during his deployment. Separated from her lover by the war, Diana wrote to him, pouring out her feelings in letters sent to him in the Gulf, the written expressions of a love conducted now across the distance of a war zone. These letters, the love letters of a princess to a soldier at war, were intimate and personal and revealing, the private outpourings of Diana's heart, and they would later become objects of enormous significance and controversy, the written evidence of the affair that would feature in the betrayals to come. But in the moment of their writing, they were simply the letters of a woman to the man she loved, separated from him by war, expressing her feelings and her longing across the distance, the tender and intimate communications of a love that endured even across the separation of the conflict. The letters were a measure of the depth of Diana's feeling, the lengths to which she went to maintain the connection with Hewitt even as the war separated them, and their later fate would be one of the cruelest aspects of the whole story. The war and the separation it imposed brought to the surface a tension that would prove fatal to the relationship, the question of Hewitt's priorities, of whether his career or his love for Diana came first. By the accounts that survive, Diana came to feel, as the relationship strained under the pressure of the deployment, that Hewitt had chosen his career over her, that he had prioritized his duties as a soldier above his love for her, that he had not been willing to give up his military life for the relationship. There is an account that Diana, distressed at the prospect of Hewitt's deployment, did what she could to prevent his going, even to the point of considering an intervention with his military superiors. So desperate was she to keep him from being sent away. But Hewitt would not give up his career, would not abandon his duties as a soldier even for the love of the princess. And Diana, feeling that he had chosen his career over her, that he had prioritized his military life above their relationship, allowed the affair to wane. The sense that Hewitt had chosen his career, that he had not been willing to sacrifice his military life for her, wounded Diana and contributed to the cooling of the relationship. The feeling of being placed second to his career, one of the factors in the affair's decline. It is worth pausing on the complexity of this, on the difficult position in which Hewitt found himself, because the demand that he choose between his career and his love for Diana was an impossible one, and his choice, whatever its consequences for the relationship, was not without its justification. Hewitt was a serving officer, a soldier with duties and obligations, and his deployment to the Gulf was not a choice but an order, the requirement of his military service in a time of war. To have abandoned his duties, to have refused his deployment or sought to evade it for the sake of a love affair, would have been a betrayal of his obligations as a soldier, a dereliction of duty in time of war, a thing that his honor and his profession would not permit. Hewitt's choice to fulfill his military duties, to go to war as his orders required, was in one sense entirely honorable, the choice of a soldier to do his duty, and it would be unfair to condemn him simply for being unwilling to abandon his obligations as an officer for the sake of the affair. The demand that he sacrifice his career for the relationship was, in a sense, an unreasonable one, and his unwillingness to do so reflected not a failure of love, but the genuine obligations of his profession. The tension between his career and his love was a real and a difficult one, and his choice to fulfill his duty, however it wounded Diana, was not without its honor. The pressure of secrecy, the relentless strain of conducting a forbidden love in the shadows, was another factor in the decline of the relationship, the cumulative toll of years of hiding and danger and concealment. The affair had always been secret, always confined to the shadows, always conducted under the constant threat of exposure, and this secrecy imposed a strain that wore at the relationship over time. The lovers could never be open, never relax into the normality of an acknowledged relationship, never escape the constant vigilance and concealment that the secret demanded. And as the years passed, as the press began increasingly to circle and the danger of exposure grew, the strain of the secrecy intensified, the pressure of maintaining the hidden love becoming ever more difficult to bear. The relationship that had been a refuge became also a burden, the secrecy that protected it also confining and straining it, and the cumulative toll of years of concealment contributed to the gradual erosion of the love. A relationship that can never escape the shadows, that must always be hidden and guarded and concealed, bears a weight that few loves can sustain indefinitely, and the weight of the secrecy was part of what wore at the affair and contributed to its decline. The press, which had always been a threat to the secret affair, began increasingly to circle as the relationship went on, the danger of exposure growing as rumors and hints began to surface. The British tabloid press, ever hungry for royal scandal, began to pick up traces of the relationship, the first hints of the affair beginning to appear, the danger that the secret would be exposed growing ever more acute. How James Hewitt came to betray the love he had shared with Diana, how he sold their secret story and profited from the relationship she had trusted him to keep, and how he transformed himself from the man Diana loved into the man Britain reviled, is where the story turns next. Because the forbidden love had ended, but the story was far from over, and the betrayal that was to come would transform everything, turning a poignant private love into a sordid public scandal, and turning James Hewitt into a byword for treachery. That betrayal, the selling of a princess's love, is where we go now. The act that transformed James Hewitt from the man Diana loved into the man Britain reviled, the betrayal that is the dark heart of his story, was the decision to sell the secret of their love, to cooperate in the public telling of a relationship that Diana had trusted him to keep private. It was a betrayal of an unusual and a particularly wounding kind, the turning of a genuine love into a commercial property, the sale of a princess's most intimate secrets for money, and it earned Hewitt a contempt that has clung to his name ever since. The instrument of the betrayal was a book, published in 1994, some years after the affair had ended, titled Princess in Love. The book was written by an author named Anna Pasternak, and it told the story of the affair between Diana and Hewitt, presenting an intimate account of their secret relationship, the love that had been hidden for years now laid out for public consumption. And the crucial fact about the book, the thing that made it a betrayal rather than merely an exposure, was that James Hewitt himself was a major source for it, a willing collaborator in the telling of the story, the man who provided the intimate details of the affair that the book revealed. This was not a case of a secret uncovered by investigative journalism, not the exposure of an affair by a press that had dug out the truth against the wishes of those involved. It was the willing cooperation of one of the lovers in the public telling of the relationship, Hewitt himself providing the material, collaborating in the book, turning the private love he had shared with Diana into the subject of a published account. The financial dimension of the betrayal is the detail that gives it its particular sordidness. The fact that Hewitt was paid, and paid handsomely, for his cooperation in the telling of the story. By the accounts that have been reported, Hewitt received a substantial sum for his collaboration on the book, a figure reported as £300,000, a considerable fortune, paid to him in exchange for the intimate secrets of his affair with Diana, the love that Diana had given him, the private relationship she had trusted him to keep, the intimate moments they had shared. All of it was turned into a commercial property, sold for a large sum of money, the betrayal compounded by the profit Hewitt took from it. He did not merely reveal the affair, he sold it, took money for the secrets of a love that Diana had trusted him to protect, profited from the relationship that had been her refuge, turned her love into cash. The financial dimension is what makes the betrayal so sordid. The sale of a princess's intimate secrets for a fortune, the transformation of a genuine love into a commercial transaction, the profiting from a relationship that should have remained private and protected. The effect on Diana was devastating, and her sense of betrayal was profound, because the man she had loved and trusted had taken the most intimate secrets of their relationship and sold them to the world. Diana felt betrayed by the book, and her sense of betrayal was entirely justified, because the publication represented a violation of the trust that had been at the heart of the relationship, the turning of a private love into a public scandal by the very man she had loved. She had trusted Hewitt with her heart, had shared with him the intimacy of a genuine love, had confided in him the secrets of a relationship that was her refuge from the misery of her marriage, and he had taken that trust and that intimacy and sold them, exposed the private love to public view, profited from the secrets she had shared with him in confidence. The betrayal was a wound of the deepest kind, the violation of intimate trust by a loved one, the turning of a private and precious relationship into a public and commercial scandal, and Diana felt it as the profound betrayal it was. The man she had loved revealed as a man who would sell her secrets for money. It is worth dwelling on the particular cruelty of this betrayal, on what it meant for a woman in Diana's position to have the man she loved expose their relationship in this way. Diana's whole life was lived under relentless public scrutiny, her every action exposed to the gaze of the world, her privacy constantly invaded by the press and the public's insatiable appetite for information about her. The affair with Hewitt had been one of the few private things in her life, a secret refuge hidden from the scrutiny that consumed everything else, a relationship that belonged to her alone and that was protected from the public gaze. And Hewitt's betrayal destroyed that privacy, dragged the secret love into the public view, exposed to the scrutiny of the world the one private and precious thing that Diana had managed to keep hidden. For a woman whose privacy was so constantly violated, the exposure of this most intimate and protected relationship by the very man she had loved was a betrayal of a peculiarly cruel kind, the destruction of the one private refuge she had, the dragging into public view of the love she had kept secret, the violation of her privacy by the person she had most trusted to protect it. The public response to Hewitt's betrayal was swift and severe, and it transformed his reputation entirely, turning him from an obscure former officer into one of the most reviled men in Britain. The British public, learning of the betrayal of the man who had sold the secrets of his affair with the beloved princess for money, responded with contempt and condemnation, and Hewitt became in the public mind the very image of the caddish betrayer, the man who had won a woman's love and then sold it for profit. He was branded a love rat, the tabloid epithet for a man who betrays the women who love him, and the label stuck, defining him in the public imagination ever after. He was reviled, condemned, treated as a figure of contempt, the man who had betrayed the nation's beloved princess, who had sold her secrets for money, who had violated the trust of a woman the public adored. The contempt was widespread, and it was lasting, Hewitt becoming one of the most despised figures in Britain, his name a byword for treachery and caddishness, his reputation destroyed by the betrayal he had committed. The transformation of the relationship in the public mind, from a poignant secret love into a sordid scandal, was one of the consequences of the betrayal, the cheapening of a genuine love by its public exposure and commercialization. What had been in its private reality a genuine and meaningful love, a refuge for a desperately unhappy woman, became in its public telling a tabloid scandal, the stuff of sensational headlines and prurient interest, the subject of a book and the gossip of the nation. The betrayal cheapened the love, dragged it from the private realm where it had been genuine and meaningful, into the public realm where it became scandal and sensation, transformed a real and poignant relationship into a sordid story sold for profit. And in doing so it did a kind of violence to the truth of the love, reducing a genuine and meaningful relationship to a tabloid scandal, cheapening the real emotion that had been at its heart, turning the refuge that had sustained Diana into the scandal that embarrassed and wounded her. The betrayal not only violated Diana's trust, but cheapened the love itself, transforming something real and meaningful into something sordid and commercial. The book was followed by further exploitation. The betrayal extended and compounded as the story was turned into other commercial products. A film was made, based on the book, dramatizing the affair for an even wider audience. The relationship now turned into entertainment, the private love commercialized further in the medium of cinema. The story that Hewitt had sold became a property exploited across multiple media, the book and the film and the ongoing public discussion. The affair turned into a commercial enterprise that generated profit and sensation, the private love now thoroughly commodified and exploited. The betrayal that had begun with the book extended into a broader commercialization of the relationship. The private love turned into a product to be sold and consumed. The intimacy that Diana had trusted Hewitt to protect now thoroughly exposed and exploited for profit and entertainment. There is a question worth confronting honestly, in fairness to Hewitt, about the pressures and the circumstances that might have led him to the betrayal, about whether there is any mitigation for what he did. Hewitt has, over the years, offered various explanations and justifications for his cooperation with the book, suggestions that he was under financial pressure, that the affair had already begun to leak and that he sought to tell his side, that he was in some way driven to it by circumstances. And it is true that Hewitt's position after the affair was a difficult one, his military career affected by the scandal, his life disrupted by his involvement with Diana, his circumstances perhaps straitened, but these mitigations, such as they are, do not excuse the betrayal, because whatever the pressures Hewitt faced, the decision to sell the intimate secrets of a love that Diana had trusted him to keep was a betrayal of a fundamental kind, a violation of trust that no financial pressure or circumstantial difficulty can justify. Many people face financial pressure and difficult circumstances without selling the secrets of those who have trusted them, and Hewitt's choice to do so, whatever its motivations, was a genuine betrayal, a failure of honor and loyalty that the mitigations cannot excuse. The pressures may explain the betrayal, but they do not justify it, and the fundamental fact remains that Hewitt sold the secrets of a love that he had been trusted to protect. The betrayal, then, was the act that defined James Hewitt, the thing that transformed him from the man Diana loved into the man Britain reviled, the violation of trust that earned him a lasting contempt. He had been given a genuine love, the trust and the intimacy of a desperately unhappy woman who had found in him a refuge from her misery, and he had betrayed that love, sold its secrets for money, exposed the private relationship to public view, transformed a genuine and meaningful love into a sordid commercial scandal. The betrayal was a wound to Diana, a violation of her trust and her privacy, and it was a destruction of Hewitt's own reputation, the act that made him a byword for treachery. It is the dark heart of his story, the betrayal that complicates and ultimately defines the tale of the man Diana was never allowed to love, the revelation that the man she loved would, in the end, prove unworthy of the love she had given him. And the betrayal did not end with the book and the film, because Hewitt would continue over the years that followed, to return to the well, to exploit his connection with Diana further, to trade on the relationship in ways that compounded the original betrayal. and deepened the contempt in which he was held. There were further books, further interviews, and most sordidly of all, reported attempts to sell the private letters that Diana had written him, the love letters from the Gulf War that were the most intimate evidence of their relationship. How Hewitt continued to exploit his connection with Diana, how the betrayal was compounded by further commercialization and by the reported attempts to sell her letters, and how the man who had loved her became the man who could not stop profiting from her, is where the story turns next. That deepening exploitation, the compounding of the betrayal, is where we go now. The betrayal of the book might have been a single lapse, a one-time failure that could perhaps be understood as the product of particular pressures at a particular moment, but James Hewitt did not stop there. Over the years that followed, he returned again and again to his connection with Diana, exploiting the relationship in book after book and interview after interview, and most sordidly of all in the reported attempts to sell the private letters she had written him. The pattern of repeated exploitation is what transformed a single betrayal into a defining characteristic, the revelation that Hewitt could not, or would not, stop profiting from the love he had betrayed. The book Princess in Love was followed, some years later, by another, a further account of the affair published under Hewitt's own name. In 1999, a book titled Love and War appeared, Hewitt's own telling of his relationship with Diana, another return to the subject, another commercial exploitation of the love that he had already betrayed once. The publication of a second book years after the first deepened the pattern of exploitation, demonstrating that the original betrayal had not been a single lapse but the beginning of an ongoing willingness to trade on the relationship, to return to the well of his connection with Diana whenever it might prove profitable. The man who had sold the secrets of the affair once was selling them again, returning to the subject in a new book, continuing to commercialize the love he had shared with Diana, the repeated exploitation, revealing a man for whom the relationship had become a renewable source of income and attention. The pattern extended beyond the books into a long series of interviews and public discussions, Hewitt returning to the subject of Diana again and again over the years, discussing the affair in the media, keeping his connection with the princess alive in the public eye long after the relationship itself had ended. He gave interviews about the affair, spoke about his time with Diana, returned repeatedly to the subject that had made him famous and infamous, the relationship with the princess becoming the defining theme of his public existence, the thing he discussed and traded on for years. This ongoing willingness to talk about Diana, to return to the subject in interview after interview, to keep the connection alive and to profit from the public interest in it, was part of the pattern of exploitation. The man who had betrayed the love once continuing to trade on it for years, unable or unwilling to let it go, returning always to the relationship that had become his sole claim to fame and his renewable source of income and attention. But the most sordid chapter in the pattern of exploitation, the episode that perhaps did the most to confirm Hewitt's reputation as a man who would stop at nothing to profit from his connection with Diana, was the reported attempt to sell the private letters that Diana had written to him during the Gulf War. These letters, as we have seen, were among the most intimate evidence of the affair, the love letters that Diana had written to Hewitt during his deployment, the tender and personal outpourings of her heart, sent to him across the distance of the war. They were private and intimate documents, the most personal evidence of the relationship, the kind of thing that any person of honor would have guarded as a sacred trust, protected from exposure, kept private out of respect for the woman who had written them and the love they represented. And Hewitt was reported, in the years after Diana's death, to have sought to sell them, to have attempted to turn these intimate love letters into cash, to have tried to profit from the most private and personal evidence of the love he had shared with Diana. The reported attempts to sell the letters provoked particular revulsion, because they represented a betrayal of an even deeper and more cynical kind than the books. The willingness to sell the most intimate and personal evidence of a love, the letters of a woman who was by then dead and could not defend herself or protest the violation. To sell the private love letters of a dead woman, the intimate communication she had written in confidence to a man she loved, was a betrayal of a peculiarly cynical and sordid kind, a violation of the most basic decency, the turning of the most private and sacred evidence of a love into a commercial property. The reports of these attempts deepened the contempt in which Hewitt was held, confirming his reputation as a man who would stop at nothing to profit from his connection with Diana, who would sell even her most intimate letters, who had no decency or honor or restraint when it came to trading on the relationship. The letters episode was, in the public mind, perhaps the lowest point of all. the most cynical and sordid of Hewitt's exploitations, the willingness to sell the private love letters of a dead woman, confirming him as a figure of contempt. It must be said, in the interest of accuracy and fairness, that the precise details and outcomes of the reported attempts to sell the letters are matters that have been reported and discussed in various ways over the years, and that the full truth of these episodes is bound up in the murky world of tabloid reporting and competing accounts. What is clear is that the letters became objects of controversy and reported commercial interest, that Hewitt was associated with attempts to profit from them, and that these reports did enormous damage to his reputation. The exact circumstances, the precise nature of the attempts, the question of what was ultimately done with the letters, are matters on which the reporting has varied, and on which complete certainty is difficult. But the broad fact, the association of Hewitt with attempts to sell or profit from Diana's private letters, is well established and was widely reported, and it is this association, this reputation for being willing to sell even the most intimate evidence of the love, that deepened the contempt in which Hewitt was held and confirmed the pattern of exploitation that defined him. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The cumulative effect of all this, the books and the interviews and the reported attempts to sell the letters, was to transform the single betrayal of Princess in Love into a defining characteristic, the revelation of a man for whom the relationship with Diana had become a renewable source of profit and attention, a man who returned again and again to trade on the love he had betrayed. The pattern of repeated exploitation was, in a sense, more damning than any single act, because it revealed not a one-time lapse under particular pressures, but an ongoing willingness to profit from the relationship, a sustained pattern of commercialization that continued for years. Hewitt did not betray Diana once and then, perhaps regretting it, withdraw into silence. He betrayed her again and again, returned repeatedly to the subject, continued to trade on the relationship for years, the pattern of exploitation revealing a man who had made the love he had shared with Diana into the central commercial asset of his existence, the thing he sold and resold and traded on without end. The transformation of Hewitt, from the man who had genuinely loved Diana into the man who could not stop profiting from her, is one of the saddest and most troubling aspects of the whole story, the corruption of a genuine love into a cynical commercial enterprise. We have seen that Hewitt's love for Diana was in its time apparently genuine, that he was devastated by the ending of the affair, that he contemplated suicide at the loss of her, and yet this same man, who had genuinely loved Diana, became the man who sold the secrets of that love, who returned again and again to profit from it, who was reported to have sought to sell even her private letters. The corruption of the genuine love into the cynical exploitation is a troubling transformation, the turning of a real emotion into a commercial property, the descent of a man who had loved into a man who would sell that love for profit. How a genuine love became a cynical enterprise, how the devastated lover became the relentless exploiter, is one of the dark mysteries of Hewitt's character. The corruption of something real into something sordid. There is a question worth confronting about whether Hewitt's repeated exploitation reflected a fundamental cynicism that had been present all along, or whether it represented a corruption of something that had once been genuine, a falling away from a love that had been real. The evidence is ambiguous, and the truth is perhaps unknowable, lying as it does in the depths of Hewitt's own character and motivations. It is possible that Hewitt was, all along, a more calculating and cynical figure than the genuine love seemed to suggest, that even his apparent devastation at the end of the affair concealed a fundamental willingness to profit from the relationship. It is also possible that the love was genuine, that the devastation was real, and that the subsequent exploitation represented a corruption, a falling away, a descent into cynicism driven by financial pressure, or wounded pride, or the simple temptation of the profit available. The truth may lie somewhere between, in a character that was capable both of genuine love and of cynical exploitation, that loved Diana truly and then, when the love had ended and the pressures mounted and the profit beckoned, betrayed that love and traded on it without end. The ambiguity is part of the complexity of Hewitt, the difficulty of reconciling the genuine love with the relentless exploitation, the devastated lover with the cynical profiteer. Whatever the truth of his motivations, the pattern of exploitation defined Hewitt in the public mind and earned him a contempt that has never fully lifted, the reputation of a man who betrayed a princess's love and could not stop profiting from it. He became, and remains, a byword for caddishness and betrayal, the love rat who sold the secrets of a beloved princess, who returned again and again to trade on the relationship, who was reported to have sought to sell even her private letters. The contempt was in large measure deserved, because the pattern of exploitation was real, the betrayal repeated and compounded over years, the willingness to profit from the love genuine and sustained. Hewitt earned his reputation as a betrayer, confirmed it through years of exploitation, became in the public mind the very image of the man who would sell a love for money, and the contempt in which he is held is the consequence of his own actions, the repeated betrayals that defined him. This pattern of exploitation, the relentless trading on the relationship, must be held in mind as we approach the question of how to judge Hewitt finally, because it is a central part of the case against him, the evidence of a genuine and sustained betrayal that complicates any sympathetic view of his role in Diana's life. But before we reach that final reckoning, we must turn to the woman at the center of the story, to Diana herself, and to the confession she made and the death that ended her life. For Diana would, before her death, confirm the affair publicly, acknowledge the love she had felt for Hewitt even after his betrayal, and her acknowledgement and her death are essential parts of the story. The words she spoke and the end she met, casting their own light on the tale of the man she was never allowed to love. How Diana came to confirm the affair publicly, what she said about her love for Hewitt even after his betrayal, and how her life came to its tragic end, is where the story turns next. Because the woman at the center of this story would speak, before her death, about the love she had felt, and her words and her death are essential to understanding the full tragedy of the man she was never allowed to love. That confession and that ending, Diana's words and her death, is where we go now. In November 1995, Diana did something that no Princess of Wales had ever done, something that broke every convention of royal discretion and stunned the watching world. She sat down before a television camera and spoke, with a frankness that was unprecedented, about the realities of her marriage and her life, and in the course of that interview she confirmed, openly and on the record, the affair with James Hewitt that had been hidden for so long. The confession was a remarkable moment, the public acknowledgement by the princess herself of the love she had felt, and it casts its own light on the whole story of the man she was never allowed to love. The interview was conducted for the BBC programme Panorama, and it was a sensation, watched by an audience of more than 20 million people in Britain alone, and by many millions more around the world, one of the most extraordinary and most discussed television interviews ever broadcast. In it, Diana spoke about her marriage, about her unhappiness, about the realities of her life as the Princess of Wales, with a candour that was utterly without precedent for a member of the royal family. She spoke about the failure of her marriage, about the presence of the other woman, delivering the famous observation that there had been 3 people in the marriage, which had made it rather crowded, the line that captured in a single phrase the devastating reality of a marriage poisoned by her husband's love for Camilla. She spoke about her own struggles, her unhappiness, the difficulties she had faced, opening to the public a window onto the private reality behind the royal facade. The interview was a revelation, the princess herself stripping away the image and speaking the truth about her life, and it transfixed the nation and the world. When the subject of James Hewitt arose, when the interviewer asked her about the relationship with the cavalry officer, Diana did not deny it or evade it. She confirmed the affair, acknowledged that the relationship had been real, and she spoke about her feelings for Hewitt with a directness that was striking. She acknowledged that she had been in love with him, that she had adored him, the words a public confession of the love she had felt, an acknowledgement before the watching world that the relationship had been genuine and that her feelings had been real. The admission was extraordinary, the Princess of Wales confessing on national television to a love affair, acknowledging the man she had loved, speaking openly of feelings that the conventions of royal life demanded be hidden. And the admission was significant not merely as a confirmation of the affair, but as an acknowledgement of the genuineness of the love, Diana's own words establishing that the relationship had been real, that her feelings had been deep, that Hewitt had been truly a man she had loved. What gives Diana's confession its particular poignancy is that she acknowledged her love for Hewitt even after his betrayal, even after he had sold the secrets of their relationship and exposed her to public scandal and become a figure of contempt. By the time of the Panorama interview, Hewitt had already committed his great betrayal, had already cooperated with the book that exposed the affair, had already become the love rat reviled by the nation, and yet Diana, speaking of him after all this, still acknowledged that she had loved him, still spoke of having adored him, the betrayal not erasing the reality of the love she had felt. There is a poignancy in this, the acknowledgement of a genuine love even after that love had been betrayed, the recognition that the relationship had been real and meaningful to her, despite the way Hewitt had since behaved. Diana distinguished in a sense between the love she had felt and the betrayal that had followed, acknowledging the genuineness of the former even in the shadow of the latter, her confession a recognition that the love had been real even though the man had proved unworthy of it. It is worth reflecting on what it cost Diana to make this confession, on the courage and the desperation that lay behind it, because the public acknowledgement of an affair was a momentous and a dangerous thing for a Princess of Wales to do. The interview was, in part, an act of rebellion against the institution that had trapped her, a breaking of the conventions of royal discretion, a seizing of her own voice and her own story after years of being silenced and constrained. Diana, by speaking openly about her marriage and her affair, was defying the institution, refusing to maintain the image any longer, telling her own truth in her own words. It was a bold and a desperate act, the act of a woman who had decided to speak rather than to be silenced, to tell her own story rather than to let it be told for her, and it carried enormous risks, exposing her to criticism and controversy and the anger of the institution she had defied. The confession was an act of courage and desperation, the seizing of her own voice by a woman who had been silenced for too long, and it casts Diana in the light of a woman fighting back against the forces that had trapped her, telling her truth at last regardless of the cost. The confession also reflected the larger struggle that defined the final phase of Diana's life, the struggle between the princess and the institution, the battle of a woman seeking to free herself from the constraints that had bound her. By 1995, Diana's marriage to Charles had effectively ended, the couple separated, the fairy tale long since collapsed into open estrangement. Diana was fighting to define her own life, to establish her own identity and her own role, to free herself from the institution that had trapped her, and the Panorama interview was a part of that struggle, a public assertion of her own voice and her own truth against the forces that had sought to control her. The confession of the affair was, in this context, not merely a personal revelation but a move in the larger battle, an assertion of Diana's right to her own story and her own life, a defiance of the institution that had denied her the love she had found and sought to control the narrative of her existence. Diana was fighting for her freedom, and the confession was a part of that fight, the seizing of her own voice in the struggle against the cage that had confined her. Less than 2 years after the Panorama interview, Diana was dead. On the 31st of August 1997 in Paris, Diana was killed in a car crash, the sudden and shocking end of a life that had transfixed the world. She had been riding in a car that crashed in a tunnel in the French capital, and she died of her injuries, her life ending abruptly and tragically at the age of 36. The death was a catastrophe that stunned the world, the loss of the most famous and most beloved woman of her age, the sudden ending of a life that had been the object of endless fascination and adoration. The outpouring of grief that followed was extraordinary, a global mourning of a scale rarely seen, the world united in shock and sorrow at the loss of the princess who had captured so many hearts. Diana's death was the tragic and untimely end of a life that had known so much unhappiness and so little of the love she had craved. The woman at the center of this story gone, suddenly and shockingly, in the prime of her life. The manner and the circumstances of Diana's death have been the subject of endless discussion and speculation over the years, the focus of inquiries and investigations and a great deal of feverish theorizing, but the essential fact, the one that matters for this story, is the simple and tragic one that Diana died young, suddenly, in a car crash in Paris, her life cut short at 36. It would not be right to indulge in the telling of this story in the various speculations and theories that have surrounded her death, the conspiracy theories and the accusations that have proliferated in the years since. What matters is the human reality. The tragedy of a young woman's life ended abruptly and shockingly, the loss of a woman who had known so much unhappiness and who died before she could find the lasting happiness that had eluded her. Diana's death was a tragedy, the untimely end of a life that deserved better, and it is as a tragedy, simply and humanly, that it should be understood and remembered. The death of Diana cast the whole story of her life, including the affair with Hewitt, into a new and a final light, the tragedy of her ending coloring everything that had come before. The woman who had been trapped in a loveless marriage, who had found a forbidden love and been denied the right to keep it, who had been betrayed by the man she loved and exposed to public scandal, who had fought to free herself from the institution that had confined her, was now dead. Her struggles ended, her life cut short before she could find peace or lasting happiness. The affair with Hewitt, the forbidden love that had been her refuge, became, in the light of her death, a part of the larger tragedy of her life. The brief happiness she had found and lost, the love she had been denied, the refuge that had been defiled by betrayal, all of it now part of the story of a life that had ended in tragedy. Diana's death gave a final and a sorrowful meaning to the whole story, the tragedy of her ending, the culmination of a life that had known so much unhappiness and so little of the love she had craved. There is a particular sorrow in the recognition that Diana died without ever having found the lasting love and happiness that she had sought throughout her life, that the woman who had craved affection and been denied it, who had found a forbidden love and lost it, who had been betrayed by the man she loved, died before she could find the secure and lasting happiness that had eluded her. Her life had been a search for love, a search driven by the loveless marriage and the lonely existence that had defined her, and she had found in the affair with Hewitt a brief and forbidden happiness that had been her refuge. But that happiness had been denied her, taken from her by the constraints of her position, and then defiled by the betrayal of the man she loved, and she had died without finding the lasting love she craved, the secure and open happiness that might have redeemed her unhappy life. There is a deep sorrow in this, the death of a woman who had sought love all her life and never found it in a lasting form, who died with her search unfulfilled, her craving for affection never satisfied, her life ending before she could find the happiness she deserved. The death of Diana also meant that she was no longer present to defend herself or to control her own story, and this fact would have a particular relevance for the betrayals that continued after her death, the reported attempts to sell her letters and the ongoing exploitation of her memory. With Diana dead, the woman at the center of the story could no longer speak for herself, could no longer protest the violations of her privacy or defend her memory against those who would exploit it. The reported attempts to sell her letters, occurring after her death, took on a particular sordidness because of this, the exploitation of a woman who was no longer present to object, the violation of the privacy of someone who could no longer defend herself. Diana's death left her memory vulnerable, her story open to those who would exploit it, her privacy at the mercy of those who would profit from it, and the continuing betrayals and exploitations that followed her death were, in this sense, betrayals of a woman who could no longer protect herself, violations of the memory of someone who was gone. And it was after Diana's death, in the years when she could no longer speak for herself, that the cruelest of the falsehoods surrounding her grew and spread, the lie that would attach itself to her younger son and to the man she had loved, the false claim that James Hewitt was the father of Prince Harry. This rumor, this persistent and damaging falsehood, became one of the defining myths surrounding Hewitt and Diana, a lie that has caused real harm to the living and that demands to be confronted and corrected. For the truth is that the rumor is false, demonstrably and provably false, impossible on the simple evidence of the dates, and the correction of this falsehood is one of the essential tasks of any honest telling of the story of James Hewitt. How the false rumor of Hewitt's paternity of Prince Harry arose and spread, why it is demonstrably and provably false, and what the truth of the matter is where the story turns next. Because the cruelest lie surrounding the story of Diana and James Hewitt is the false claim about Prince Harry's paternity, and the honest telling of this story requires confronting that lie directly and demolishing it completely. That confrontation with the lie, the debunking of the paternity myth, is where we go now. Of all the falsehoods that have attached themselves to the story of Diana and James Hewitt, the cruelest and the most persistent is the claim that Hewitt is the biological father of Prince Harry, Diana's younger son. It is a rumor that has circulated for decades, repeated in gossip and insinuation and tabloid speculation, and it is false, demonstrably and provably false, impossible on the simple evidence of the dates. The honest telling of this story requires confronting the lie directly and demolishing it completely, both because the truth matters and because the falsehood has caused real harm to a living person who deserves to be free of it. The rumor rests, as such rumors so often do, on the flimsiest of foundations, on a superficial physical resemblance that gossip has seized upon and inflated into a supposed proof. The basis of the claim is the color of Prince Harry's hair, the red hair that Harry has had since childhood, which the purveyors of the rumor have pointed to as evidence that his father must be the red-haired Hewitt rather than Charles. The argument, such as it is, runs that Harry's red hair resembles Hewitt's colouring and differs from the colouring of Charles, and that this resemblance somehow proves that Hewitt, and not Charles, must be Harry's biological father. It is an argument of the most superficial and unfounded kind, a piece of gossip dressed up as evidence, the seizing upon a physical resemblance to construct a salacious and damaging claim, and it has been repeated and circulated for years, attaching itself to Harry and to Hewitt, and to the memory of Diana. The rumour is false, and it can be shown to be false with complete certainty by the simplest possible means, which is a comparison of the dates. The decisive fact, the fact that demolishes the rumour entirely and beyond any possibility of doubt, is the chronology, the simple matter of when Harry was born and when Diana met James Hewitt. Prince Harry was born on the 15th of September, 1984. This means that he was conceived approximately 9 months earlier, around the end of 1983, at a time when his elder brother William, born in June 1982, was a small child of around 18 months. And the crucial fact, the fact that ends the matter, is that Diana did not meet James Hewitt until the summer of 1986, approximately 2 years after Harry was born. The chronology is decisive and it is simple. Harry was conceived around the end of 1983 and born in September 1984. Diana did not meet Hewitt until the summer of 1986. Hewitt was a complete stranger to Diana at the time Harry was conceived and born, a man she would not meet for nearly 2 more years, and it is therefore chronologically impossible, on the plainest evidence of the dates, for Hewitt to be Harry's father. This is not a matter of probability or interpretation or competing accounts. It is a matter of simple chronology, of dates that do not align, of a physical impossibility established by the calendar. A man cannot father a child with a woman he has not yet met, and Diana had not yet met Hewitt when Harry was conceived. The affair began in 1986. Harry was born in 1984. The 2 years that separate Harry's birth from the beginning of the affair make Hewitt's paternity not merely unlikely but impossible, a physical and chronological impossibility that no amount of speculation about red hair can overcome. The rumour collapses entirely on the evidence of the dates, demolished by the simple fact that Hewitt and Diana had not met when Harry was conceived, that the affair began 2 years after Harry was born, that Hewitt was a stranger to Diana at the time of Harry's conception and birth. The chronology is decisive, and it ends the matter completely. The point has been made repeatedly and emphatically by those in a position to know, and their testimony reinforces the simple evidence of the dates. James Hewitt himself has stated, on multiple occasions over the years, that he is not Harry's father, pointing out that Harry had already been born by the time the affair began. Hewitt has been unequivocal on this point, stating clearly that the chronology makes his paternity impossible, that he did not meet Diana until after Harry was born, that he cannot be and is not the father. And the same point has been made with particular authority by Ken Waff, Diana's royal protection officer, the man who was close to Diana and knew the realities of her life, who has addressed the rumour directly and demolished it. In his account of his years with Diana, Waff has stated plainly that a simple comparison of the dates proves it impossible for Hewitt to be Harry's father, laying out the chronology that ends the matter, the birth of Harry in September 1984, and the beginning of the affair in 1986, the impossibility established by the calendar. The testimony of Hewitt himself and of Waff, both in a position to know, reinforces the simple evidence of the dates, the chronology that makes the rumour impossible. As for the red hair that the rumour has seized upon as its supposed proof, the truth is that red hair is a trait of Diana's own family, the Spencers, and Harry's colouring is readily explained by his maternal inheritance with no need to look beyond his actual parents. The Spencer family, Diana's family, includes red hair among its traits, and the resemblance that the gossips have cited as proof of Hewitt's paternity is in fact simply the expression of Harry's Spencer inheritance, the red hair coming from his mother's side of the family. Diana's own sister Jane had red hair as a young woman, the trait running in the Spencer line, and Harry's red hair is the natural inheritance of this Spencer colouring, a trait passed down through his mother's family with no need for any other explanation. Diana herself is said to have attributed Harry's colouring to her own family, to have called him her little Spencer, recognizing the red hair as the expression of his Spencer inheritance. The supposed proof of the rumour, the red hair, is in fact no proof at all but simply the expression of Harry's maternal inheritance, the Spencer trait that explains his colouring entirely, without recourse to the false claim of Hewitt's paternity. The one person who knew beyond any doubt the truth of Harry's paternity was Diana herself, and Diana was clear that Harry was Charles's son. Diana, who alone knew the full truth of her own life, who knew when she had conceived Harry and with whom, was unequivocal that Harry was the son of Charles, conceived within her marriage before she had ever met Hewitt. She is reported to have stated plainly that Harry was Charles's child, that there was no doubt about his paternity, that he had been conceived within the marriage at a time when she had not yet met Hewitt. The testimony of Diana herself, the one person who knew the truth with absolute certainty, confirms what the chronology establishes, that Harry is Charles's son, that Hewitt's paternity is impossible, that the rumor is false. There is no doubt, no ambiguity, no room for the speculation that the rumor has fed upon. Harry is the son of Charles, conceived within Diana's marriage before she met Hewitt, and the rumor of Hewitt's paternity is false. It is important to be clear and emphatic about the falseness of this rumor, because it is not a harmless piece of gossip but a damaging falsehood that has caused real harm to a living person. Prince Harry is a living man, and the persistent rumor that his biological father is not Charles but James Hewitt is a cruel and a damaging thing, a falsehood that calls into question his paternity and his identity, that has followed him throughout his life, that has been used to wound and to insult him. The rumor is not a victimless piece of speculation but a harmful lie that has affected a real person, casting a false shadow over his origins, subjecting him to insinuation and insult based on a claim that is demonstrably false. To repeat the rumor, to give it currency, to treat it as an open question, is to participate in the harm it does, to perpetuate a falsehood that has wounded a living person. And so it must be stated clearly and emphatically that the rumor is false, that Hewitt is not Harry's father, that the claim is impossible on the evidence of the dates, in order to correct the falsehood, and to refuse to participate in the harm it does. The persistence of the rumor, despite its demonstrable falseness, is itself a revealing thing, a measure of the appetite for salacious gossip, and the difficulty of killing a falsehood once it has taken hold. The rumor has persisted for decades, repeated and circulated despite the simple evidence that demolishes it, kept alive by the appetite for scandal and the reluctance of gossip to be governed by facts. It is a demonstration of how a falsehood, once it has taken hold, can persist in the face of all evidence, repeated and believed despite being provably untrue, sustained by the desire to believe something salacious, and the difficulty of correcting a rumor that has spread. The persistence of the Hewitt paternity rumor, despite its complete demolition by the evidence of the dates, is a cautionary tale about the power of gossip and the difficulty of killing a falsehood, the way a damaging lie can outlive every refutation, sustained by the appetite for scandal that gives it life. The honest telling of this story, then, requires the firm and emphatic correction of this falsehood, the clear statement that Hewitt is not Harry's father, that the rumor is false and impossible and harmful. This is not a matter on which it is appropriate to be coy or to leave room for doubt, not a matter on which the salacious speculation deserves any indulgence. The truth is clear, established by the simple evidence of the dates, confirmed by the testimony of those who know, and the falsehood is harmful, a cruel lie that has wounded a living person. And so the honest course is to state the truth plainly and to demolish the lie completely, to refuse to give the rumor any currency, to correct the falsehood firmly, and to insist upon the truth. James Hewitt is not the father of Prince Harry. The rumor is false, impossible on the evidence of the dates, and it has caused real harm to a living man who deserves to be free of it. That is the truth, and it must be stated clearly, in the interest of justice and accuracy, and the correction of a damaging lie. This correction of the falsehood brings us to the threshold of the final reckoning, the assessment of James Hewitt himself, the question of how to judge the man at the center of this story. For we have seen the genuine love and the genuine betrayal, the real refuge that Hewitt provided Diana, and the real treachery with which he later repaid her trust. And now we have demolished the false rumor that has unfairly attached itself to him. The task that remains is to weigh all of this, to arrive at a fair and honest judgment of Hewitt, distinguishing what he is genuinely guilty of from what he is falsely accused of, separating the real failings that condemn him from the false rumor that has unjustly defined him. How James Hewitt should finally be judged, what he is genuinely guilty of, and what he is falsely accused of, and how to arrive at a fair reckoning with the complicated man at the center of this story, is where the story turns next. That fair reckoning with Hewitt, the man and the myth, is where we go now. Now comes the difficult task, the fair reckoning with James Hewitt himself, the attempt to judge honestly a man who has been both unfairly maligned and genuinely culpable, who is guilty of real betrayals and falsely accused of things he did not do. To judge Hewitt fairly requires holding several truths together at once, resisting both the easy condemnation that makes him a simple villain and the sympathetic exculpation that excuses his genuine failings, arriving at a portrait that is honest about both the man's real culpability and the injustices he has suffered. Begin with the case for understanding Hewitt sympathetically, the factors that complicate the simple picture of him as a villain, because they are real and they deserve acknowledgement. Hewitt was, when the affair began, a young cavalry officer who found himself drawn into a relationship with the most famous and most scrutinized woman in the world, a situation of extraordinary difficulty that few people could have navigated well. He did not seek out the Princess of Wales or scheme to seduce her. He met her by chance, was drawn into a relationship that developed naturally from friendship into love, found himself involved with a woman whose position made the relationship impossibly dangerous and complicated. The situation he found himself in was one of enormous pressure and difficulty, a secret affair with a princess, conducted under constant threat of exposure, freighted with dangers and complications that would have tested anyone. To be the secret lover of the Princess of Wales was not an easy or an enviable position, but a fraught and dangerous one, and Hewitt navigated it as a young man caught up in something far larger and more dangerous than he could fully control. The genuineness of Hewitt's love for Diana is another factor that complicates the simple condemnation, because the evidence suggests that his feelings, at least during the affair itself, were real. We have seen that Hewitt was devastated by the ending of the relationship, that he contemplated suicide at the loss of Diana, that the affair meant a great deal to him. This depth of feeling suggests that Hewitt genuinely loved Diana, that the relationship was not for him a cynical seduction or a calculated exploitation, but a real love, a genuine emotional attachment to the woman he had become involved with. Whatever he did later, however he betrayed the relationship in the years that followed, the love itself appears to have been real, his feelings during the affair genuine, his devastation at its ending sincere. This genuineness of the original love is a real part of the picture, a factor that complicates the image of Hewitt as a mere cynical exploiter. The evidence that he was, at least in the time of the affair, a man genuinely in love. There is also a sense in which Hewitt was, like Diana, a victim of the impossible situation, caught up in a relationship that could never have a happy ending, trapped by circumstances beyond his control. The affair was doomed from the start, confined to secrecy, denied any future, certain to end in pain one way or another. Hewitt, by becoming involved with Diana, had entered a relationship that could bring him no lasting happiness, that was certain to end badly, that would expose him to enormous risks and ultimately to public infamy. He was, in a sense, caught in the same trap that confined Diana, involved in a love that could never be fulfilled, drawn into a situation that was certain to end in pain. This does not excuse his later betrayals, but it is part of the picture, the recognition that Hewitt too was caught up in an impossible situation, a victim, in his way, of the same circumstances that trapped Diana, involved in a doomed relationship that could bring him no lasting good. And it should be acknowledged that Hewitt has over the years expressed a degree of regret for some of his actions, particularly for the book that exposed the affair, suggesting that he came to recognize the betrayal it represented. Hewitt has in various statements over the years expressed regret for the Princess in Love book, acknowledged that it was a mistake, suggested that he wished he had not cooperated with it. This expression of regret, whatever its sincerity, is a part of the picture, the suggestion that Hewitt came to recognize the wrong he had done, that he was not entirely without conscience about his betrayal, that he came to regret at least some of his exploitation of the relationship. The regret does not undo the betrayal, but it is a factor in the assessment, the recognition that Hewitt was capable of acknowledging, at least in part, the wrong he had committed. But when all these mitigating factors have been acknowledged, when the sympathetic case has been fully made, the fundamental fact remains that Hewitt betrayed Diana, and betrayed her grievously, and the betrayal cannot be explained away or excused. Whatever the difficulties of his situation, whatever the genuineness of his original love, whatever regret he may later have expressed, Hewitt made the choice to sell the secrets of the relationship, to cooperate with the book that exposed the affair, to profit from the love that Diana had trusted him to keep private. And he made that choice not once but repeatedly, returning again and again to exploit the relationship, writing further books, giving interviews, being associated with attempts to sell Diana's private letters. The pattern of betrayal was real, and it was sustained, a series of choices to profit from the love, and to violate the trust, and no amount of mitigation can erase the fundamental fact of it. Hewitt betrayed Diana repeatedly and grievously, and the betrayal is the central truth of his culpability, the thing for which he is genuinely and justly condemned. The betrayal is made worse, not better, by the genuineness of the original love, because it means that Hewitt betrayed not a casual fling but a real relationship, sold the secrets not of a meaningless encounter but of a genuine love. If the relationship had been a mere cynical arrangement on both sides, the betrayal might be less significant, the selling of secrets that meant nothing. But the relationship was real, the love genuine, the trust that Diana placed in Hewitt, the trust of a woman who truly loved him and believed herself loved in return. And Hewitt betrayed that real love, that genuine trust, sold the secrets of a relationship that had meant something, profited from a love that had been real. The genuineness of the love makes the betrayal worse, because it means that Hewitt betrayed something real and precious, violated a genuine trust, sold a love that had truly existed. The man who had genuinely loved Diana became the man who sold that love for money, and the betrayal of a real love is a graver thing than the exposure of a meaningless arrangement. Here we arrive at the crucial distinction that must govern any fair judgment of Hewitt, the distinction between what he is genuinely guilty of and what he is falsely accused of, because the two have become confused in the public mind in a way that does a kind of double injustice. James Hewitt is genuinely guilty of betraying Diana, of selling the secrets of their love, of profiting from the relationship and violating her trust, and for this he is justly condemned. But James Hewitt is falsely accused of being the father of Prince Harry, a claim that is demonstrably impossible and that has unjustly defined him in the public mind. The confusion of these two things, the genuine betrayal and the false paternity, has done a double injustice, allowing the false accusation to compound the contempt that the real betrayal earned, and obscuring the distinction between what Hewitt actually did and what he is falsely accused of doing. To judge Hewitt fairly requires separating these two things, condemning him for the real betrayal while clearing him of the false accusation, holding him accountable for what he actually did while refusing to convict him of what he did not do. This distinction matters because justice requires it, because a fair judgment must be based on the truth rather than on the confusion of real and false accusations. Hewitt deserves condemnation for his genuine betrayals, for the selling of the love and the violation of the trust, and that condemnation is just and deserved. But he does not deserve the false accusation of fathering Harry, a claim that is impossible and untrue, and to allow that false accusation to stand, to let it compound the contempt that his real betrayals earned, is an injustice. The fair judgment of Hewitt requires precision, the careful separation of the real from the false, the condemnation of the genuine betrayal, and the clearing of the false accusation. He is guilty of betraying Diana, and for that he is justly reviled. He is innocent of fathering Harry, and of that false charge he should be cleared. Justice requires both, the holding accountable for the real wrong, and the clearing of the false accusation, and a fair reckoning with Hewitt must maintain this distinction with care. The portrait of Hewitt that emerges from this fair reckoning is a complicated one, neither the simple villain of popular contempt nor the sympathetic victim that the mitigating factors might suggest, but a flawed and complex man who genuinely loved and genuinely betrayed, who was caught in an impossible situation and made genuinely culpable choices within it. He was a young man drawn into a relationship of enormous difficulty, who genuinely loved the woman he became involved with, who was in some sense a victim of the impossible situation, and who then betrayed that love grievously, selling its secrets and profiting from it repeatedly over the years. He is genuinely guilty of betrayal and falsely accused of paternity, deserving of condemnation for the former and of vindication on the latter. The complexity of the portrait, the holding together of the genuine love and the genuine betrayal, the real culpability and the false accusation, is the honest reckoning with Hewitt, the recognition that he was neither a simple villain nor an innocent victim, but a flawed and complex man, whose story resists the easy judgments that have so often been applied to it. There is a final dimension to the fair reckoning with Hewitt, and it concerns the way his genuine betrayal and his false accusation have together obscured the deeper truth of the story, the truth about Diana and the institution and the love she was never allowed to have. The focus on Hewitt, on his betrayal and on the false rumor, has tended to obscure the larger tragedy, the tragedy of Diana herself, the woman trapped in a loveless marriage and denied the love she found, failed by the institution that confined her, and by the man who betrayed her. The story is, in the end, not really about Hewitt at all, but about Diana, about the cage she lived in, and the love she was denied, and the tragedy of her unhappy life. And the fair reckoning with Hewitt, important as it is, must finally give way to the deeper reckoning with the larger tragedy, the recognition that the real story is the story of Diana, the woman at the center, who deserved better than the institution that trapped her, and the man who betrayed her, and the lies that have surrounded her memory. How the whole story should finally be understood, what the tragedy of Diana and James Hewitt reveals about the institution that confined her, and the love she was never allowed to have, and what the final reckoning with this story of forbidden love and betrayal and lies amounts to, is where the story comes to its close. Because the time has come for the final judgment, the honest verdict on the whole tragic tale, the reckoning with the woman at the center who deserved so much better than she received. That final reckoning, the verdict on the whole tragedy, is where we go now. The story of James Hewitt and Diana, Princess of Wales, has been told so often as a scandal, a tale of royal infidelity and caddish betrayal and tabloid sensation, that the deeper truth of it has been buried beneath the gossip and the speculation and the lurid headlines. But when the gossip is stripped away, when the sensation is set aside and the lies are corrected, what remains is something quieter and sadder and more human than any scandal, the tragedy of a desperately unhappy woman who found one genuine refuge in a cold and loveless life, and who was failed by everyone and everything that should have protected her. The time has come for the final reckoning, the honest verdict on the whole of it, and the verdict must center, in the end, not on the man whose name the story bears, but on the woman at the heart of it, the woman who deserved so much better than she received. Begin with the truth of the title, the claim that James Hewitt was the man Diana was never allowed to love, because that claim, for all the complications that surround it, is essentially true, and its truth is the foundation of everything. Diana did love James Hewitt. The love was real, genuine, acknowledged by Diana herself before the watching world, a relationship that gave her, in the midst of her misery, a warmth and an affection and a happiness that she had been so long denied. And she was never allowed to keep it, never permitted to have openly the love she had found, forbidden by the cage of her position and the constraints of the institution from the ordinary human happiness of being loved. The title captures a genuine tragedy, the tragedy of a woman who found love and was denied the right to have it, who tasted happiness only in secret and could never make it permanent or open, who was, in the most literal sense, never allowed to love the man she loved. The forbidden love was real, and the forbidding was the work of forces larger than Diana herself, the institution and the position that confined her and denied her the love she had found. It is worth being clear, against the tendency to reduce the affair to a sordid scandal, about the genuineness of what Diana found in Hewitt, because the reality of the love is essential to the tragedy. Diana did not turn to Hewitt out of frivolity or recklessness or a careless disregard for her marriage. She turned to him out of a desperate need for the affection that her marriage had denied her, out of the loneliness and the misery of a loveless union, out of the human hunger for warmth and love that her cold marriage and her isolating life had left so cruelly unmet. And in Hewitt she found for a time the answer to that hunger, the affection and the attention and the passion she craved, a genuine love that was in the desolation of her life, a real and a precious refuge. The affair was not a betrayal of a happy marriage but a refuge from an unhappy one, not a careless indulgence but the response of a starved heart to the first real warmth it had encountered in years. The love was genuine, the refuge real, and the happiness Diana found in it, however brief and however forbidden, was one of the few genuine joys of her unhappy life. And this is the first and the deepest cruelty of the story, that Diana was never allowed to keep the one genuine refuge she had found. That the love that gave her happiness was forbidden her by the institution that had already denied her so much. She had been trapped in a loveless marriage, had been denied the love of her husband, had been isolated in a cold institution that gave her no warmth or comfort. And when she found, in spite of everything, a genuine love that gave her the affection she craved, that love too was denied her, forbidden by her position, confined to secrecy, denied any future or any possibility of becoming the open and permanent happiness she deserved. The institution that had given her no love itself now forbade her the love she had found elsewhere. The cage that had denied her happiness, now denying her the refuge she had discovered. The woman who had been starved of affection now forbidden the affection she had found. The cruelty of this is profound. The denial to a desperately unhappy woman of the one genuine refuge she had found, the forbidding of the love that gave her happiness by the same institution that had denied her happiness in the first place. The cruelty is sharpened, made into a genuine injustice, by the hypocrisy of the double standard that governed Diana's situation, the fact that she was forbidden her love, while her husband was permitted his. This is the heart of the takedown that the story contains, the indictment of the institution that confined Diana, and it must be stated plainly. Charles, Diana's husband, loved another woman, Camilla, had loved her before the marriage and throughout it, and his relationship with her was tolerated and accommodated by the institution, an open secret that the system made room for. The husband had his love, his relationship outside the marriage, and the institution permitted it, and the wife, Diana, was denied the same, forbidden the love she had found, held to a standard of fidelity that her husband was permitted to violate, confined to a loveless marriage while her husband enjoyed his own love elsewhere. The double standard was stark and it was unjust. The institution permitting the husband what it forbade the wife, tolerating Charles' love while condemning Diana's, the ancient hypocrisy by which men were granted freedoms that women were denied, falling upon Diana with particular cruelty. The injustice is compounded by the order of events, by the fact that it was Charles' own infidelity that had driven Diana to seek the love she found with Hewitt. Diana did not betray a faithful husband. She sought love outside a marriage that her husband had already abandoned, turned to Hewitt for the affection that Charles, whose heart belonged to Camilla, would not give her. Her affair was a response to her husband's, her seeking of love a consequence of his own faithlessness, and yet she was the one condemned, the one forbidden, the one held to account, while Charles, whose prior infidelity had driven her to it, enjoyed the toleration of the institution. The victim of the betrayal was treated as the offender. The woman driven to seek love by her husband's faithlessness was condemned for finding it. The wife who had been denied love by her husband was forbidden the love she found elsewhere, while the husband's own love was accommodated. The injustice of this is glaring, and it is the heart of the indictment of the institution, the system that trapped Diana in a loveless marriage, denied her the love of her husband, and then forbade her the love she found while permitting her husband his own. This indictment of the institution is the deeper takedown that the story of Diana and Hewitt contains, beyond the betrayal of Hewitt himself, and it is an indictment that goes to the nature of the monarchy and the cruelty of the cage it built around Diana. The institution took a young woman, married her into a loveless union for dynastic purposes, denied her the love and the support and the warmth she needed, isolated her in a cold and unforgiving world, and then, when she sought in desperation the affection she had been denied, forbade her that too, confining her to a misery from which there was no escape. The monarchy that should have protected Diana instead trapped her, the institution that should have supported her instead confined her, the system that should have given her a life of meaning and dignity instead gave her a cage of loveless misery from which she could find no exit. And the hypocrisy of the double standard, the permitting to the husband what was forbidden the wife, revealed the injustice at the heart of the institution, the unequal and cruel standard that fell upon Diana while sparing her husband. The takedown of the institution is the recognition of all this, the cruelty and the hypocrisy and the injustice of a system that trapped a young woman in a loveless marriage and denied her the ordinary human happiness of being loved. There is a larger truth here about the cost of the monarchy, about the human being sacrificed to its needs, and Diana's story is perhaps the most poignant illustration of it in modern times. The monarchy is an institution that demands the subordination of the individual to the role, the sacrifice of personal happiness to dynastic and institutional needs, and Diana was, in a sense, sacrificed to those needs, her happiness subordinated to the requirements of the crown. She was married for dynastic purposes, to provide an heir, and to fulfill the needs of the institution, and her own happiness, her own need for love and fulfillment, was treated as secondary, subordinated to the role she was required to play. And when her marriage failed to give her the happiness she needed, when she found herself trapped in a loveless union, the institution offered her no escape, no relief, no path to the happiness she craved, demanding instead that she remain in her role, maintain the image, sacrifice her own fulfillment to the needs of the crown. Diana was a human being sacrificed to an institution, her happiness subordinated to its needs, her life confined by its demands, and her story is a powerful illustration of the human cost of the monarchy, the individuals whose happiness is sacrificed to the requirements of the crown. So Diana was failed by the institution, trapped and confined and denied the happiness she deserved, and this is the first of the two great failures that define her tragedy. But she was failed a second time, and this second failure came from the man she had loved, from James Hewitt himself, who betrayed the love that had been her refuge and turned her genuine happiness into a sordid scandal. The second failure is the betrayal of Hewitt, the violation of the trust that Diana had placed in him, the selling of the secrets of their love, the transformation of a genuine refuge into a public humiliation. Diana had found in Hewitt a genuine love that was her refuge from the misery of her marriage, had trusted him with her heart and her secrets, had given him the intimacy and the trust of a woman who truly loved, and he had betrayed that trust, sold the secrets of their love, profited from the relationship she had trusted him to protect, turned her refuge into a scandal that wounded and humiliated her. The second failure was the failure of the man she loved, the betrayal of the one person who should have protected the love they shared, the violation of the trust of a woman who had given him her heart. The two failures together define the tragedy of Diana's situation, the double failure of the institution that trapped her and the man who betrayed her. She was failed by the institution that confined her in a loveless marriage and denied her the love she found, and she was failed by the man she loved, who betrayed the trust she had placed in him and sold the secrets of their love. The institution denied her the right to keep her love, and the man defiled the love itself, the one taking from her the possibility of an open and lasting happiness, the other corrupting the genuine love she had found into a sordid scandal. Diana was failed twice, by the system that trapped her, and by the man she trusted, and the double failure is the heart of her tragedy. The recognition that the woman who deserved love and protection received instead the cruelty of the institution, and the betrayal of the man, denied happiness by the one and wounded by the other. It is worth pausing on the particular poignancy of this double failure, on what it meant for a woman in Diana's situation to be failed in both these ways. Diana's whole life was a search for love, a search driven by the loveless marriage and the lonely existence that had defined her, and she had found in Hewitt a genuine love that answered her need. To have that love forbidden by the institution was a cruelty, the denial of the happiness she had found, but to have it then betrayed by the man himself, to discover that the love she had trusted had been sold and exploited and turned into a scandal, was a deeper wound still, the violation of the one genuine intimacy she had found, the corruption of the one real refuge she had discovered. Diana was failed in the deepest way, in the very thing she most needed and had most struggled to find, the genuine love that was her refuge taken from her by the institution, and then defiled by the man, the woman who had searched for love all her life, finding it only to have it forbidden and then betrayed. The double failure struck at the very heart of Diana's need, the love she craved denied her by the cage and corrupted by the man, and the poignancy of it is the poignancy of a woman failed in the one thing that mattered most. And now we must turn to the fair and final judgment of Hewitt himself, the man whose betrayal was the second of the two failures, because the honest reckoning requires a verdict on him that is neither the simple condemnation of popular contempt nor the sympathetic exculpation that excuses his genuine failings. Hewitt was a complicated figure, and the truth about him is complicated, and the fair judgment must hold the complications together. He was a young man drawn into an impossibly difficult situation, who genuinely loved the woman he became involved with, who was in some sense a victim of the same circumstances that trapped Diana, and he betrayed that love grievously, sold its secrets, profited from the relationship repeatedly over the years, violated the trust of the woman who had loved him. He was neither a simple villain nor an innocent victim, but a flawed and complex man who genuinely loved and genuinely betrayed, and the fair judgment of him must recognize both the genuineness of the love and the gravity of the betrayal. The genuineness of Hewitt's love is a real part of the picture, and it must be acknowledged even as the betrayal is condemned. The evidence suggests that Hewitt's feelings during the affair were real, that he genuinely loved Diana, that he was devastated by the ending of the relationship to the point of contemplating taking his own life. The love was not, at least in its time, a cynical seduction or a calculated exploitation, but a genuine emotional attachment, a real love for the woman he had become involved with. This genuineness complicates the picture of Hewitt as a mere cad, a simple villain who set out to seduce and exploit a princess. He was a man who genuinely loved, whose feelings during the affair were real, whose devastation at its ending was sincere, and the genuineness of the love is a real part of the fair judgment, the recognition that Hewitt was not, at least originally, a cynical exploiter, but a man genuinely in love, caught up in a real relationship with a woman he truly cared for. But the genuineness of the love does not excuse the betrayal, and indeed, as we have seen, it makes the betrayal worse, because it means that Hewitt betrayed not a meaningless arrangement, but a genuine love, sold the secrets not of a casual encounter, but of a real relationship that had meant something to both of them. The betrayal is the central fact of Hewitt's culpability, the thing for which he is justly condemned, and no acknowledgement of the original love can erase it. Hewitt made the choice to sell the secrets of the relationship, to cooperate with the book that exposed the affair, to profit from the love that Diana had trusted him to keep private. And he made that choice repeatedly, returning again and again to exploit the relationship over the years. The pattern of betrayal sustained and deliberate. The betrayal was real and it was grievous, a violation of trust that wounded Diana and that earned Hewitt the contempt in which he is held, and it cannot be explained away or excused by the genuineness of the original love. Hewitt loved Diana and he betrayed her, and the betrayal is the truth of his culpability, the thing for which he is justly and permanently condemned. The fair judgment of Hewitt, then, holds these two truths together, the genuine love and the genuine betrayal, recognizing both without allowing either to cancel the other. He genuinely loved Diana, and he genuinely betrayed her. He was a man caught in an impossible situation, and he made genuinely culpable choices within it. He was neither a simple villain nor an innocent victim, but a flawed and complex man, whose story resists the easy judgments, and the verdict on him must be a complex one, condemning the betrayal while acknowledging the love, holding him accountable for the violation of trust, while recognizing the genuineness of the original feeling, refusing both the simple condemnation and the sympathetic exculpation in favor of an honest reckoning with the complicated truth. Hewitt was a man who loved and betrayed, and the fair judgment is the recognition of both, the condemnation of the betrayal and the acknowledgement of the love, the honest portrait of a flawed and complex man. And the fair judgment of Hewitt requires above all the firm and final correction of the false accusation that has unjustly defined him, the demolition of the lie that he is the father of Prince Harry. This must be stated one final time, clearly and emphatically, because it is essential to the justice of the reckoning, and because the lie has caused real harm. James Hewitt is not the father of Prince Harry. The claim is false, demonstrably and provably false, impossible on the simple evidence of the dates. Harry was born in September 1984. Diana did not meet Hewitt until the summer of 1986, nearly 2 years later. Hewitt was a stranger to Diana at the time Harry was conceived and born, and it is therefore chronologically impossible for him to be Harry's father. The rumor is a lie, demolished by the simple chronology, confirmed false by the testimony of those who know, and it has caused real harm to Prince Harry, a living man who deserves to be free of it. The fair judgment of Hewitt requires the clearing of this false accusation, the firm statement that he is not Harry's father, the demolition of the lie that has unjustly defined him. The distinction between the real betrayal and the false accusation is the crux of the justice owed to Hewitt, and it is owed not for his sake alone, but for the sake of the truth and for the sake of Prince Harry. Hewitt is genuinely guilty of betraying Diana, and for that he is justly condemned. He is falsely accused of fathering Harry, and of that false charge he should be cleared. The confusion of the two, the way the false accusation has compounded the contempt that the real betrayal earned, has done a double injustice, allowing a lie to magnify the condemnation and obscuring the distinction between what Hewitt actually did and what he is falsely accused of doing. To judge Hewitt fairly requires separating these two things, condemning him for the real betrayal while clearing him of the false accusation, holding him accountable for what he actually did while refusing to convict him of what he did not do. This distinction matters because justice requires it, because a fair judgment must be based on the truth rather than on the confusion of real and false accusations. Hewitt deserves condemnation for his genuine betrayals, for the selling of the love and the violation of the trust, and that condemnation is just and deserved. But he does not deserve the false accusation of fathering Harry, a claim that is impossible and untrue, and to allow that false accusation to stand, to let it compound the contempt that his real betrayals earned, is an injustice. The fair judgment of Hewitt requires precision, the careful separation of the real from the false, the condemnation of the genuine betrayal, and the clearing of the false accusation. He is guilty of betraying Diana, and for that he is justly reviled. He is innocent of fathering Harry, and of that false charge he should be cleared. Justice requires both, the holding accountable for the real wrong, and the clearing of the false accusation, and a fair reckoning with Hewitt must maintain this distinction with care. The portrait of Hewitt that emerges from this fair reckoning is a complicated one. Neither the simple villain of popular contempt nor the sympathetic victim that the mitigating factors might suggest, but a flawed and complex man who genuinely loved and genuinely betrayed, who was caught in an impossible situation and made genuinely culpable choices within it. He was a young man drawn into a relationship of enormous difficulty, who genuinely loved the woman he became involved with, who was in some sense a victim of the impossible situation, and who then betrayed that love grievously, selling its secrets and profiting from it repeatedly over the years. He is genuinely guilty of betrayal and falsely accused of paternity, deserving of condemnation for the former and of vindication on the latter. The complexity of the portrait, the holding together of the genuine love and the genuine betrayal, the real culpability and the false accusation, is the honest reckoning with Hewitt, the recognition that he was neither a simple villain nor an innocent victim, but a flawed and complex man whose story resists the easy judgments that have so often been applied to it. There is a final dimension to the fair reckoning with Hewitt, and it concerns the way his genuine betrayal and his false accusation have together obscured the deeper truth of the story, the truth about Diana and the institution and the love she was never allowed to have. The focus on Hewitt, on his betrayal and on the false rumor, has tended to obscure the larger tragedy, the tragedy of Diana herself, the woman trapped in a loveless marriage and denied the love she found, failed by the institution that confined her and by the man who betrayed her. The story is, in the end, not really about Hewitt at all, but about Diana, about the cage she lived in, and the love she was denied, and the tragedy of her unhappy life. And the fair reckoning with Hewitt, important as it is, must finally give way to the deeper reckoning with the larger tragedy, the recognition that the real story is the story of Diana, the woman at the center, who deserved better than the institution that trapped her, and the man who betrayed her, and the lies that have surrounded her memory. How the whole story should finally be understood, what the tragedy of Diana and James Hewitt reveals about the institution that confined her and the love she was never allowed to have, and what the final reckoning with this story of forbidden love and betrayal and lies amounts to, is where the story comes to its close. Because the time has come for the final judgment, the honest verdict on the whole tragic tale, the reckoning with the woman at the center who deserved so much better than she received. That final reckoning, the verdict on the whole tragedy, is where we go now. The story of James Hewitt and Diana, Princess of Wales, has been told so often as a scandal, a tale of royal infidelity and caddish betrayal and tabloid sensation, that the deeper truth of it has been buried beneath the gossip and the speculation and the lurid headlines. But when the gossip is stripped away, when the sensation is set aside and the lies are corrected, what remains is something quieter and sadder and more human than any scandal. The tragedy of a desperately unhappy woman who found one genuine refuge in a cold and loveless life, and who was failed by everyone and everything that should have protected her. The time has come for the final reckoning, the honest verdict on the whole of it, and the verdict must center, in the end, not on the man whose name the story bears, but on the woman at the heart of it, the woman who deserved so much better than she received. Begin with the truth of the title, the claim that James Hewitt was the man Diana was never allowed to love, because that claim, for all the complications that surround it, is essentially true, and its truth is the foundation of everything. Diana did love James Hewitt. The love was real, genuine, acknowledged by Diana herself before the watching world. A relationship that gave her, in the midst of her misery, a warmth and an affection and a happiness that she had been so long denied. And she was never allowed to keep it, never permitted to have openly the love she had found, forbidden by the cage of her position and the constraints of the institution from the ordinary human happiness of being loved. The title captures a genuine tragedy, the tragedy of a woman who found love and was denied the right to have it, who tasted happiness only in secret, and could never make it permanent or open, who was, in the most literal sense, never allowed to love the man she loved. The forbidden love was real, and the forbidding was the work of forces larger than Diana herself, the institution and the position that confined her and denied her the love she had found. It is worth being clear, against the tendency to reduce the affair to a sordid scandal, about the genuineness of what Diana found in Hewitt, because the reality of the love is essential to the tragedy. Diana did not turn to Hewitt out of frivolity or recklessness or a careless disregard for her marriage. She turned to him out of a desperate need for the affection that her marriage had denied her, out of the loneliness and the misery of a loveless union, out of the human hunger for warmth and love that her cold marriage and her isolating life had left so cruelly unmet. And in Hewitt she found for a time the answer to that hunger, the affection and the attention and the passion she craved, a genuine love that was in the desolation of her life, a real and a precious refuge. The affair was not a betrayal of a happy marriage but a refuge from an unhappy one, not a careless indulgence but the response of a starved heart to the first real warmth it had encountered in years. The love was genuine, the refuge real, and the happiness Diana found in it, however brief and however forbidden, was one of the few genuine joys of her unhappy life. And this is the first and the deepest cruelty of the story, that Diana was never allowed to keep the one genuine refuge she had found, that the love that gave her happiness was forbidden her by the institution that had already denied her so much. She had been trapped in a loveless marriage, had been denied the love of her husband, had been isolated in a cold institution that gave her no warmth or comfort, and when she found, in spite of everything, a genuine love that gave her the affection she craved, that love too was denied her, forbidden by her position, confined to secrecy, denied any future or any possibility of becoming the open and permanent happiness she deserved. The institution that had given her no love itself now forbade her the love she had found elsewhere, the cage that had denied her happiness now denying her the refuge she had discovered, the woman who had been starved of affection now forbidden the affection she had found. The cruelty of this is profound, the denial to a desperately unhappy woman of the one genuine refuge she had found, the forbidding of the love that gave her happiness by the same institution that had denied her happiness in the first place. The cruelty is sharpened, made into a genuine injustice, by the hypocrisy of the double standard that governed Diana's situation, the fact that she was forbidden her love while her husband was permitted his. This is the heart of the takedown that the story contains, the indictment of the institution that confined Diana, and it must be stated plainly. Charles, Diana's husband, loved another woman, Camilla, had loved her before the marriage and throughout it, and his relationship with her was tolerated and accommodated by the institution, an open secret that the system made room for. The husband had his love, his relationship outside the marriage, and the institution permitted it, and the wife Diana was denied the same, forbidden the love she had found, held to a standard of fidelity that her husband was permitted to violate, confined to a loveless marriage while her husband enjoyed his own love elsewhere. The double standard was stark and it was unjust, the institution permitting the husband what it forbade the wife, tolerating Charles's love while condemning Diana's, the ancient hypocrisy by which men were granted freedoms that women were denied falling upon Diana with particular cruelty. The injustice is compounded by the order of events, by the fact that it was Charles's own infidelity that had driven Diana to seek the love she found with Hewitt. Diana did not betray a faithful husband. She sought love outside a marriage that her husband had already abandoned, turned to Hewitt for the affection that Charles, whose heart belonged to Camilla, would not give her. Her affair was a response to her husband's, her seeking of love a consequence of his own faithlessness. And yet she was the one condemned, the one forbidden, the one held to account, while Charles, whose prior infidelity had driven her to it, enjoyed the toleration of the institution. The victim of the betrayal was treated as the offender. The woman driven to seek love by her husband's faithlessness was condemned for finding it. The wife who had been denied love by her husband was forbidden the love she found elsewhere, while the husband's own love was accommodated. The injustice of this is glaring, and it is the heart of the indictment of the institution, the system that trapped Diana in a loveless marriage, denied her the love of her husband, and then forbade her the love she found while permitting her husband his own. This indictment of the institution is the deeper takedown that the story of Diana and Hewitt contains, beyond the betrayal of Hewitt himself, and it is an indictment that goes to the nature of the monarchy and the cruelty of the cage it built around Diana. The institution took a young woman, married her into a loveless union for dynastic purposes, denied her the love and the support and the warmth she needed, isolated her in a cold and unforgiving world, and then, when she sought in desperation the affection she had been denied, forbade her that too, confining her to a misery from which there was no escape. The monarchy that should have protected Diana instead trapped her. The institution that should have supported her instead confined her. The system that should have given her a life of meaning and dignity instead gave her a cage of loveless misery from which she could find no exit. And the hypocrisy of the double standard, the permitting to the husband what was forbidden the wife, revealed the injustice at the heart of the institution, the unequal and cruel standard that fell upon Diana while sparing her husband. The takedown of the institution is the recognition of all this, the cruelty and the hypocrisy and the injustice of a system that trapped a young woman in a loveless marriage and denied her the ordinary human happiness of being loved. There is a larger truth here about the cost of the monarchy, about the human being sacrificed to its needs, and Diana's story is perhaps the most poignant illustration of it in modern times. The monarchy is an institution that demands the subordination of the individual to the role, the sacrifice of personal happiness to dynastic and institutional needs, and Diana was, in a sense, sacrificed to those needs, her happiness subordinated to the requirements of the crown. She was married for dynastic purposes, to provide an heir and to fulfill the needs of the institution, and her own happiness, her own need for love and fulfillment was treated as secondary, subordinated to the role she was required to play. And when her marriage failed to give her the happiness she needed, when she found herself trapped in a loveless union, the institution offered her no escape, no relief, no path to the happiness she craved, demanding instead that she remain in her role, maintain the image, sacrifice her own fulfillment to the needs of the crown. Diana was a human being sacrificed to an institution, her happiness subordinated to its needs, her life confined by its demands, and her story is a powerful illustration of the human cost of the monarchy, the individuals whose happiness is sacrificed to the requirements of the crown. So Diana was failed by the institution, trapped and confined and denied the happiness she deserved. And this is the first of the two great failures that define her tragedy. But she was failed a second time, and this second failure came from the man she had loved, from James Hewitt himself, who betrayed the love that had been her refuge and turned her genuine happiness into a sordid scandal. The second failure is the betrayal of Hewitt, the violation of the trust that Diana had placed in him, the selling of the secrets of their love, the transformation of a genuine refuge into a public humiliation. Diana had found in Hewitt a genuine love that was her refuge from the misery of her marriage, had trusted him with her heart and her secrets, had given him the intimacy and the trust of a woman who truly loved, and he had betrayed that trust, sold the secrets of their love, profited from the relationship she had trusted him to protect, turned her refuge into a scandal that wounded and humiliated her. The second failure was the failure of the man she loved, the betrayal of the one person who should have protected the love they shared, the violation of the trust of a woman who had given him her heart. The two failures together define the tragedy of Diana's situation, the double failure of the institution that trapped her and the man who betrayed her. She was failed by the institution that confined her in a loveless marriage and denied her the love she found, and she was failed by the man she loved, who betrayed the trust she had placed in him and sold the secrets of their love. The institution denied her the right to keep her love, and the man defiled the love itself, the one taking from her the possibility of an open and lasting happiness, the other corrupting the genuine love she had found into a sordid scandal. Diana was failed twice, by the system that trapped her, and by the man she trusted, and the double failure is the heart of her tragedy, the recognition that the woman who deserved love and protection received instead the cruelty of the institution and the betrayal of the man, denied happiness by the one and wounded by the other. It is worth pausing on the particular poignancy of this double failure, on what it meant for a woman in Diana's situation to be failed in both these ways. Diana's whole life was a search for love, a search driven by the loveless marriage and the lonely existence that had defined her, and she had found in Hewitt a genuine love that answered her need. To have that love forbidden by the institution was a cruelty, the denial of the happiness she had found. But to have it then betrayed by the man himself, to discover that the love she had trusted had been sold and exploited and turned into a scandal, was a deeper wound still, the violation of the one genuine intimacy she had found, the corruption of the one real refuge she had discovered. Diana was failed in the deepest way, in the very thing she most needed and had most struggled to find, the genuine love that was her refuge taken from her by the institution and then defiled by the man, the woman who had searched for love all her life, finding it only to have it forbidden and then betrayed. The double failure struck at the very heart of Diana's need, the love she craved denied her by the cage and corrupted by the man, and the poignancy of it is the poignancy of a woman failed in the one thing that mattered most. And now we must turn to the fair and final judgment of Hewitt himself, the man whose betrayal was the second of the two failures, because the honest reckoning requires a verdict on him that is neither the simple condemnation of popular contempt, nor the sympathetic exculpation that excuses his genuine failings. Hewitt was a complicated figure, and the truth about him is complicated, and the fair judgment must hold the complications together. He was a young man drawn into an impossibly difficult situation, who genuinely loved the woman he became involved with, who was in some sense a victim of the same circumstances that trapped Diana. And he betrayed that love grievously, sold its secrets, profited from the relationship repeatedly over the years, violated the trust of the woman who had loved him. He was neither a simple villain nor an innocent victim, but a flawed and complex man who genuinely loved and genuinely betrayed. And the fair judgment of him must recognize both the genuineness of the love and the gravity of the betrayal. The genuineness of Hewitt's love is a real part of the picture, and it must be acknowledged even as the betrayal is condemned. The evidence suggests that Hewitt's feelings during the affair were real, that he genuinely loved Diana, that he was devastated by the ending of the relationship to the point of contemplating taking his own life. And the false accusation has wronged not only Hewitt but Harry, casting a false shadow over the paternity of a living man, subjecting him to insinuation and insult based on a claim that is impossible and untrue. Justice requires the separation of the real from the false, the condemnation of the genuine betrayal and the clearing of the false accusation, for the sake of the truth and for the sake of the love was not, at least in its time, a cynical seduction or a calculated exploitation, but a genuine emotional attachment, a real love for the woman he had become involved with. This genuineness complicates the picture of Hewitt as a mere cad, a simple villain who set out to seduce and exploit a princess. He was a man who genuinely loved, whose feelings during the affair were real, whose devastation at its ending was sincere, and the genuineness of the love is a real part of the fair judgment. The recognition that Hewitt was not, at least originally, a cynical exploiter but a man genuinely in love, caught up in a real relationship with a woman he truly cared for. But the genuineness of the love does not excuse the betrayal, and indeed, as we have seen, it makes the betrayal worse, because it means that Hewitt betrayed not a meaningless arrangement but a genuine love, sold the secrets not of a casual encounter, but of a real relationship that had meant something to both of them. The betrayal is the central fact of Hewitt's culpability, the thing for which he is justly condemned, and no acknowledgement of the original love can erase it. Hewitt made the choice to sell the secrets of the relationship, to cooperate with the book that exposed the affair, to profit from the love that Diana had trusted him to keep private, and he made that choice repeatedly, returning again and again to exploit the relationship over the years, the pattern of betrayal sustained and deliberate. The betrayal was real and it was grievous, a violation of trust that wounded Diana and that earned Hewitt the contempt in which he is held, and it cannot be explained away or excused by the genuineness of the original love. Hewitt loved Diana and he betrayed her, and the betrayal is the truth of his culpability, the thing for which he is justly and permanently condemned. The fair judgment of Hewitt then holds these two truths together, the genuine love and the genuine betrayal, recognizing both without allowing either to cancel the other. He genuinely loved Diana, and he genuinely betrayed her. He was a man caught in an impossible situation, and he made genuinely culpable choices within it. He was neither a simple villain nor an innocent victim, but a flawed and complex man, whose story resists the easy judgments, and the verdict on him must be a complex one, condemning the betrayal while acknowledging the love, holding him accountable for the violation of trust while recognizing the genuineness of the original feeling, refusing both the simple condemnation and the sympathetic exculpation in favor of an honest reckoning with the complicated truth. Hewitt was a man who loved and betrayed, and the fair judgment is the recognition of both, the condemnation of the betrayal and the acknowledgement of the love, the honest portrait of a flawed and complex man. And the fair judgment of Hewitt requires, above all, the firm and final correction of the false accusation that has unjustly defined him, the demolition of the lie that he is the father of Prince Harry. This must be stated one final time, clearly and emphatically, because it is essential to the justice of the reckoning, and because the lie has caused real harm. James Hewitt is not the father of Prince Harry. The claim is false, demonstrably and provably false, impossible on the simple evidence of the dates. Harry was born in September 1984. Diana did not meet Hewitt until the summer of 1986, nearly 2 years later. Hewitt was a stranger to Diana at the time Harry was conceived and born, and it is therefore chronologically impossible for him to be Harry's father. The rumor is a lie, demolished by the simple chronology, confirmed false by the testimony of those who know, and it has caused real harm to Prince Harry, a living man who deserves to be free of it. The fair judgment of Hewitt requires the clearing of this false accusation, the firm statement that he is not Harry's father, the demolition of the lie that has unjustly defined him. The distinction between the real betrayal and the false accusation is the crux of the justice owed to Hewitt, and it is owed not for his sake alone, but for the sake of the truth and for the sake of Prince Harry. Hewitt is genuinely guilty of betraying Diana, and for that he is justly condemned. He is falsely accused of fathering Harry, and of that false charge he should be cleared. The confusion of the two, the way the false accusation has compounded the contempt that the real betrayal earned, has done a double injustice, allowing a lie to magnify the condemnation and obscuring the distinction between what Hewitt actually did and what he is falsely accused of doing. Living man whom the lie has wronged. But when the judgment of Hewitt has been rendered, when the betrayal has been condemned and the false accusation cleared, the story returns, as it must, to Diana, to the woman at the center, because the story is in the end hers. The focus on Hewitt, on his betrayal and on the false rumor, has tended to obscure the deeper truth, the tragedy of Diana herself, and the final reckoning must give that tragedy its due. Diana was the woman trapped in a loveless marriage, denied the love of her husband, isolated in a cold institution, starved of the affection she craved. She was the woman who found, in spite of everything, a genuine love that was her refuge, and who was denied the right to keep it, forbidden by the institution and the position that confined her. She was the woman betrayed by the man she loved, her genuine love sold and exploited and turned into scandal, and she was the woman who died young, suddenly, tragically, before she could find the lasting happiness she had sought all her life. The story is hers, the tragedy hers, and the final reckoning must center on her, on the woman who deserved so much better than she received. What Diana deserved, and what she did not receive, is the measure of the tragedy, and it is worth stating plainly. Diana deserved love, the love of a husband who would cherish her, the affection and the warmth that every human being needs. She did not receive it, married instead to a man whose heart belonged to another, denied the love she craved. Diana deserved support, the support of an institution that would protect and sustain her, the help of a system that would care for her well-being. She did not receive it, isolated instead in a cold and unforgiving institution that gave her no warmth or comfort. Diana deserved the freedom to find happiness, the right to the ordinary human fulfillment of being loved. She did not receive it, forbidden instead the love she found, confined to a misery from which there was no escape. Diana deserved a man who would honor the love she gave, who would protect the trust she placed in him. She did not receive it, betrayed instead by the man she loved, her genuine love sold and exploited. At every turn Diana deserved better than she received, denied the love and the support and the freedom and the loyalty that she deserved, failed by the institution and the man and the circumstances that should have given her the happiness she craved. There is a particular sorrow in the recognition that Diana died without ever finding the lasting love and happiness she had sought, that her life ended before she could escape the cage and find the fulfillment she deserved. Her life had been a search for love, a search driven by the loveless marriage and the lonely existence that had defined her, and she had found in the affair with Hewitt a brief and forbidden happiness that had been her refuge. But that happiness had been denied her, taken from her by the institution, and then defiled by the man, and she had died, suddenly and tragically, before she could find the lasting love she craved. She died with her search unfulfilled, her craving for affection never satisfied in a lasting form, her life ending before she could find the secure and open happiness that might have redeemed her unhappy existence. There is a deep sorrow in this, the death of a woman who had sought love all her life and never found it in a form she could keep, who died young with her deepest need unmet, who deserved so much happiness and received so little. The tragedy of Diana is the tragedy of a woman who deserved love and was denied it, who found it briefly and lost it, who died before she could find it in a lasting form, the woman who searched for love all her life and never found the happiness she deserved. And here the title of the story returns to us, transformed by all that we have learned, its meaning deepened and complicated and made true. James Hewitt was the man Diana was never allowed to love, and the phrase, which might have seemed a simple romantic framing, has revealed itself to contain the whole tragedy of her situation. She did love him, genuinely and deeply, a real love that was her refuge, and she was never allowed to love him, never permitted to keep the love she had found, forbidden by the institution and the position that confined her, denied the ordinary human happiness of being loved. The man she loved was a man she was never allowed to love, denied her by the cage of the institution and the cruelty of a marriage crowded by another woman, and the title captures this genuine tragedy, the denial to a desperately unhappy woman of the one genuine refuge she had found. The forbidden love was real, and the forbidding was unjust, and the title names the tragedy, the love that Diana was never allowed to have. But the title contains too a deeper and a sadder irony, because the man Diana was never allowed to love proved, in the end, unworthy of the love she had given him, betraying the trust she had placed in him, and turning her genuine love into a sordid scandal. There is a double tragedy in this, the tragedy of a love forbidden and the tragedy of a love betrayed. The woman denied the right to keep her love by the institution, and then failed by the man himself, who proved unworthy of it. Diana was never allowed to love Hewitt, and the man she loved betrayed her. The forbidden love compounded by the betrayal, the tragedy of the denial deepened by the tragedy of the unworthiness. The man she was never allowed to love was also a man who did not deserve the love she gave him. And the double tragedy of this, the forbidden love and the unworthy beloved, is the final and the bitterest truth of the story. And there is a final wrong done to Diana, beyond the forbidding and the betrayal, and it is the lie that has surrounded her memory, the false claim about Harry's paternity that has wronged her and her son in the years since her death. Diana's memory has been wronged by the persistent falsehood that the man she loved fathered her younger son, a lie that is impossible and untrue, and that has cast a false shadow over her memory and her son's paternity. The lie wrongs Diana because it distorts the truth of her life, attaches to her memory a falsehood about her most private matters, subjects the woman who can no longer defend herself to a damaging and untrue claim. And it wrongs Harry, the living son, casting a false shadow over his paternity, subjecting him to insinuation based on a lie. Diana, who was failed by the institution and betrayed by the man, has been wronged in death by the lie that surrounds her memory, the falsehood that distorts the truth of her life and wrongs her son, and the correction of that lie is part of the justice owed to her memory, the setting straight of the record, the defense of the truth of her life against the falsehood that has wronged it. So the final reckoning with the story of Diana and James Hewitt is a reckoning with a tragedy, the tragedy of a woman who deserved love and was denied it, who found a genuine refuge and was forbidden to keep it, who trusted a man who betrayed her, whose memory has been wronged by a lie. It is the story of a desperately unhappy woman, trapped in a loveless marriage and a cold institution, who found in the affair with Hewitt one genuine source of happiness in a life of misery, and who was failed at every turn by the institution that confined her, by the man who betrayed her, by the lies that have surrounded her memory. The man whose name the story bears is a part of the tragedy, the genuine love he gave and the genuine betrayal he committed. But the tragedy is Diana's, the woman at the center who deserved so much better than she received, who searched for love all her life and found it only to lose it, who died young with her deepest need unmet. When we think of Diana now, in the years since her death, we should think of her not as the subject of a scandal or the victim of a tabloid sensation, but as a human being who deserved love and was denied it, a woman of warmth and feeling trapped in a cold and loveless world, who reached for happiness and was forbidden to keep it. We should remember the genuine love she found, the real refuge that the affair gave her, the brief happiness she discovered in the midst of her misery. We should remember the cruelty of the institution that confined her, the hypocrisy that denied her the love it permitted her husband, the cage that trapped her in a misery from which there was no escape. We should remember the betrayal of the man she loved, the violation of the trust she placed in him, the corruption of her genuine love into a sordid scandal. And we should remember the lie that has wronged her memory, the falsehood that must be corrected, the truth that must be defended. Diana deserved better than the institution that trapped her, better than the man who betrayed her, better than the lies that have surrounded her memory, and the honest reckoning with her story is in the end an act of justice toward a woman who received so little of the justice and the love she deserved. The affair with James Hewitt was a brief chapter in Diana's life, a few years of forbidden love in the midst of a longer tragedy, but it captures in its way the whole of her situation, the loveless marriage and the desperate search for affection, the genuine love found and forbidden, the trust given and betrayed. It is a window onto the tragedy of Diana, the woman trapped in the cage of the monarchy, denied the love she craved, failed by the institution and the man and the circumstances that should have given her happiness. And it is a reminder of the human cost of the institution, the individual's sacrifice to the needs of the crown, the happiness subordinated to the demands of the role, The human beings whose lives are confined and constrained and ultimately broken by the machinery of monarchy. Diana was such a human being, sacrificed to the institution, her happiness subordinated to its needs, her life confined by its demands, and her story is a powerful and a painful illustration of the cost of the crown, the price paid by the human beings caught in its machinery. The man she was never allowed to love is, in the final accounting, a secondary figure, a part of the tragedy but not its center. The genuine love he gave and the genuine betrayal he committed both subordinate to the larger tragedy of Diana herself. He was a flawed and complex man who genuinely loved and genuinely betrayed, falsely accused of one thing and genuinely guilty of another, neither the simple villain of popular contempt nor the innocent victim of the sympathetic view. But the story is not really about him, it is about Diana, the woman at the center, the desperately unhappy princess who found in him a brief refuge from her misery, and who was failed, by him and by the institution and by the circumstances of her life, in the one thing she most needed and most deserved, the love that might have given her happiness. The man she was never allowed to love is a part of her tragedy, but the tragedy is hers, and the final reckoning belongs to her. And so we leave Diana where she belongs, at the center of her own story, the woman who deserved love and was denied it, who found a genuine refuge and was forbidden to keep it, who was failed by everyone and everything that should have protected her, and who died young with her deepest need unmet. She was the most famous and most photographed woman of her age, adored by millions, the object of endless fascination and endless scrutiny, and she was, in the private reality of her life, a desperately lonely woman, starved of the love she craved, trapped in a cage from which she could find no escape, failed by the institution and the man and the circumstances of her life. The gap between what she appeared to have and what she actually had, between the envy of the world and the reality of her misery, is the particular tragedy of Diana, and the story of James Hewitt, the man she was never allowed to love, is a window onto that tragedy, the brief refuge she found, and the forbidding and the betrayal that defined it. She loved him genuinely and briefly and against all the constraints of her position. She was never allowed to keep that love, forbidden by the cage of the institution and the hypocrisy of a marriage crowded by another woman. The man she loved betrayed her, turning her genuine love into a sordid scandal, proving unworthy of the trust she had placed in him. And her memory has been wronged by a lie, the false claim about her son's paternity that must be corrected and demolished. At every turn Diana deserved better, and at every turn she was failed. The woman who searched for love all her life, finding it only to have it forbidden and betrayed, and surrounded by lies. That is the real story of James Hewitt. And it is in the end the story of Diana, the woman at its heart who deserved so much more than the love she was never allowed to keep, the happiness she was never allowed to find, and the justice she was never, in her short and unhappy life, allowed to receive. She was never allowed to love him. And the deeper truth, the one that outlasts the scandal and the betrayal and the lies, is that she was never allowed by the cage that held her simply to be happy, simply to be loved, simply to live the ordinary human life of warmth and affection that she craved and deserved and never found. That was the real prohibition, the one that defined her life, the denial not merely of a single love, but of the happiness that every human being deserves. Diana was never allowed to love, and she was never allowed to be loved as she deserved, and she died with that deepest need unmet, the woman who gave so much warmth to the world and received so little of it in return. The man she was never allowed to love has his place in the story, but the story and the sorrow and the final word belong to her. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.